All right, welcome folks. My name's Joshua Croak, and I'm really honored to be helping facilitate today's summit on cultivating a school to possibility pipeline, which is our second summit on disrupting and eliminating the school to prison pipeline in Massachusetts. I'm the founder of Action by Design, and our team has been working with the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, JDAI, and convening our work group to dismantle the school to prison pipeline for about 3 years now. Action by Design supports community growth and social change through the transformative power of creative arts, media, and design. We're built on a foundation of pursuing equitable, just, and joyful futures for everybody. And by partnering with local communities, we help facilitate conversations that lead to action and design solutions to intersectional issues that our youth, our families, and our communities face every day. Our work's rooted in a commitment to collective liberation, and we believe that creative expression and design are powerful tools for social change. So thank you all so much for being here. I'll invite folks to update their Zoom name to their name, any affiliations that you want kind of present in this space, and your pronouns. My pronouns are they, them. Thanks for being here, everybody. Thank you also. I have to do a huge shout out to our working group, the JDI working group to disrupt and eliminate the school to prison pipeline in Massachusetts, and our subcommittees for planning this summit with really true passion and true commitment to improving outcomes for youth in our communities. I'm going to give a very quick overview of some of what's led our working group to organizing the summit and our focus, and then I'll be introducing Katie Perry-Lorenz from JDAI to go into a little bit more detail about JDAI's work and the work of this working group. So I'm going to start from kind of where we are now, and Katie's going to share a little bit about what brought us to this point. Our JDAI working group to disrupt and eliminate the school to prison pipeline introduced our first summit to the Commonwealth in October of 2021. As part of that work, and informed by our working group and the hundreds of attendees at our first summit, we aligned around some shared values that we feel are really critical to name and bring into any space that we're holding with members of our community and our state. The first is a fundamental vision that every child thrives, and with the long-term goal of disrupting and eliminating the school to prison pipeline across Massachusetts and across this country. Something that I think is really critical to name in this work is that everyone that has participated in this working group to bring folks this summit today has a fundamental driving belief that there are no bad kids, and that the systems that have been created and the decisions and policies and practices that have been put into place are failing our young people in many ways, and that we need to really look at how to build and rebuild systems, structures, policies, and practices that truly believe in our young people and believe in their abilities and their desire to live, connected, happy, healthy, fulfilling, and thriving lives. The principles that move our work forward are also really important for us to name. Our core principles really articulate the lens through which we view our change work as a group. And so we move forward with the expectation that each of these areas plays a central role in developing and assessing any projects, policies, or initiatives that the group supports or designs. And that is to be equity-centered, healing-centered, and trauma-informed, actively anti-racist and centering racial equity in our work, being developmentally appropriate to the age of the child, and being rooted in transformative justice and restorative approaches. So I wanted to just share a little bit about that. And as you step into this space today, I'd like to encourage everyone to consider your own sphere of influence. It could be your role in your job. It could be within your family. Think about the role that you play within your community and how the content that's going to be shared today can really be carried forward after this summit and into your day-to-day. We're very excited to be welcoming folks from across the state in various roles and capacities. We have folks who are working within our state systems, DYS, DCF, DMH, and DESE, and more. We have educators, school district administrators. We have elected officials on this call, and thank you for your leadership and attendance at today's event. We also have parents and families and young people who have been impacted by these systems that we are actively working to change. So we want to just invite everybody to take a moment and think about your positioning and within your community and the impact that you can have as we introduce a lot of topics and information. So I'm really excited to introduce Katie Perry-Lorenz from the JDAI team. Catherine Perry-Lorenz is the JDAI state coordinator for Massachusetts. In this role, she oversees the statewide work of the initiative, including the JDAI governance subcommittees, and supervises the work of the JDAI counties. Katie joined DYS in 2021 as JDAI's detention reform specialist. Prior to coming to JDAI, she worked as a juvenile defense attorney for the Committee for Public Counsel Services in its Youth Advocacy Division, and as a CLAVC, Civil Legal Aid for Victims of Crime attorney at the Children's Law Center of Massachusetts, representing youth in education, guardianship, benefits, and domestic matters. Katie's background in law and her positive youth development approach, combined with her knowledge of Massachusetts systems and her understanding of the myriad challenges faced by youth and families of color in the juvenile legal process, underscore her commitment to driving change within our system. Katie, thanks so much for being here, and it's been a really fabulous privilege to be able to work alongside you in bringing this summit to fruition, as well as the other work that JDAI is leading across the state.
Josh, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to officially welcome you to the Creating a School to Possibility Pipeline Summit, JDAI's second summit on disrupting the school to prison pipeline. The Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, or JDAI, was developed by the Annie E. Casey Foundation over 25 years ago and has been active in Massachusetts since 2007. JDAI's initial focus was on reducing the numbers of low-risk youth entering detention from the juvenile legal system. Since 2007, we have seen an 83% decline of the numbers of youth entering detention in Massachusetts, from 4,345 in 2007 to 728 youth in 2022. While JDAI's work remains committed to reducing the number of detention admissions even further, other factors strongly influence our work. Unfortunately, and perhaps unsurprisingly, the 83% decline of youth entering detention from 2007 to 2022 was not the same for youth of all races. In fact, as the numbers of youth entering detention decreased, the overrepresentation of youth of color in detention increased. This signals the need for JDAI to focus on race equity in all our reform efforts and to look beyond a single decision-making point to the broader juvenile legal continuum. As Josh mentioned, JDAI began working with Action by Design in January of 2020 to explore and discover opportunities to increase individuals' understanding of JDAI's mission and to identify other areas ripe for reform under the JDAI model. After conducting outreach, meeting with members, and surveying stakeholders, it became apparent that the school to prison pipeline is the most significant pathway leading youth, particularly youth of color, into the juvenile detention system and away from successful outcomes. Clearly, this was the next place we should turn our efforts. In October of 2021, we held our first summit on eliminating the school to prison pipeline. The summit brought stakeholders together from the areas of public education, juvenile justice, child welfare, and those with lived experience, who spoke on the harms of the pipeline and its impact on achieving equitable outcomes for youth. Seeing the need for ongoing work in this area, the Annie E. Casey Foundation awarded JDAI a generous grant that allowed us to form a school to prison pipeline work group focused on creating long-lasting, impactful change centered in equity and justice. Today's summit, Creating a School to Possibility Pipeline, is the culmination of extensive work by the dedicated members of this work group. We truly believe that school districts and educators want what is best for their students. But students today have complex needs that are not always met by traditional educational practices and methods. It is our aim to provide you today with practical, tangible examples of how educators can alter school and classroom climates, embrace restorative mindsets, and identify options outside of the court system that will support students towards progress and success. We thank you for joining us and hope today's programming will be enlightening and inspiring.
Thank you so much, Katie. I'm really excited now to introduce Adele Ace Magia, who was born and raised in Worcester, Massachusetts. Ace is 20 years old and currently attends Quinsigamond Community College for Liberal Arts and Theater. Ace is the Worcester Youth Poet Laureate, where they host open mics at The Village in Worcester and Palace Elite Barber Spa. Today, Ace will be sharing a spoken word performance with us titled Young. This poem depicts the everyday problems most young men of color face in the U.S. It's a satirical spoken word meant to give a harsh look on what our responsibility as the next generation means to kids who with marginalized backgrounds. Ace, thanks so much for being here. Take it away.
Hello, everybody. I'm reading it off of my phone. I hope you can see me. Oh, you can see me. Great. Okay. Well, anyway, this one's called Young. Imagine you're a young man second-guessing everything. Your perspectives crisscross, irony's been tossed in college, wrestling objectives. Just to be objectified by tyranny. Why try when I be lucky just a still second? I know your confession, the question lies hidden in the message. A strong percentage of rich strive off lies. Or my guys kill each other to survive. Oh me, oh my, no one's surprised because your only objective is to teach me a lesson, right? What if I never took lead of the stampede? What if my reasons weren't good enough to exceed? What's your problem with my personality? I don't come from a fairy tale nor a masterpiece. I should have died when I struggled with my mentality. Dying left me feeling empty with PTSD. I say hood kids is good kids, but they're forced to act hardcore. They sleeping in torn pajamas on tile floors. Parkour away from the police. Grease my Yeezys on the concrete. These events cease my peace. I fell onto my knees. I should file for misery. Out came the tapes, knees on face, blood on the street. Audience are obsolete in the back seat. Cameras flashy, tweets and hashtag Snapchats of a young man in pain. His cries are showcased. I said, help. He can't fight for himself. He started to strain when the other blues came, twisting his arms, telling him to stay calm. Cops love to say stop resisting, but this ain't no game. Young boy screaming out his mother's name. Mother's too busy being mothers for others. Daddy's under the covers with an undercover. Family's melting like someone cooking butter. I'm screaming, don't leave us. It seems guys worry about Adidas, Balenciaga, and Gap. We're trapped in an iPhone waiting for playback. Lord knows what my people would do if they got their hands on a camera. Acting out for clout, these memes don't run out of stamina. This is America, self-doubt gon' damage ya. Everyone's acting out of parameter. Ego so high we might as well reside in Canada. I'm treating these journalists like therapists. I'm questioning character. Why full-blown savages wearing diamonds stolen from Africans? I'm no longer masking it. War prone over bloodstones. Look at the ravages. We just want to be felt. I don't want to lose my life. I apologize. I'm not polite. We just want our name in the lights, fighting with knives, guns, knives, usually over dimes and fives. Most of the time it's against each other. Brother against brother, all brothers supposed to be big brother. If my boy don't got a house to live under, on my couch he could sit, and on my toilet he could, because we segregated, always hated by the outside. Good or bad, we never separated. Our beauty is located on the inside, outside, outside in. All my life I've been told to win, go get it. Go get it again. And then I fall short like the shot was taken from half court. Sucky feeling when the one in front makes it. If you're not first, then where you're placing. If you don't want to place, you're not complacent. No patience, they'll place you with racists in the placement of pavement. Your only power is complaining, so don't waste it. The only time we end up on the news is when we're singing the blues, looking blue, needing fuel, begging for food, or being told a blue truth. Another brother's blood shed by the red, white, and blue. Who are you? I was here first. Why I gotta go? I mean, it's cool. I'll put my hands up. Just please don't shoot. I've yet to man up. It'll break my mother's heart not watching the baby man up. It'll break the hood's heart to hang up my shoes outside my school on the tree next to the flag that represents liberty. It should break your heart knowing those damn shoes belong to a cool kid who never grew out their youth. We need a change. If not, there's a price to pay. This chapter of my life is called Growing Up. That being said, I hope y'all enjoyed it. You can follow me on Instagram at AceXMeeks. Once again, ACEX, no spaces in between, Meeks, MEEKS. Thank you all so much. I hope y'all have a good one. Beautiful event.
Great job.
Thank you so much, Ace. Wow. Ooh, all right, I got to be spotlit after that. Our summit today is going to feature what we call lightning keynotes. Think of these as very quick TED-style talks. Their goal, in addition to providing more information for your toolbox, is to get you curious and asking questions with hopes you'll stay involved in this work and bring these topics into your spheres of influence. We have the summit loosely divided into sections that reflect 3 focus areas: our working group, workshops that we've run, and our 2021 summit attendees help to identify as critical disruption points for dismantling the school to prison pipeline. Those are law and policies, literacy, and cultivating restorative practices. Today, you'll hear from people with lived experience and experts in education and youth justice as they share resources, tools, and role-specific opportunities to create a school to possibility pipeline in Massachusetts. I'm excited to introduce our first presentation from Leon Smith and Aaron Stewart with the Citizens for Juvenile Justice, entitled Hard Facts, an overview of school to prison pipeline and school hardening. Leon Smith is the executive director of Citizens for Juvenile Justice, a statewide organization that has advocated systemic reform to achieve equitable youth justice since 1994. He started his career as a juvenile court public defender before starting his own law practice devoted to juvenile and criminal court advocacy in the Massachusetts Juvenile, District, and Superior Courts. Leon then started the Racial Justice Project for the Connecticut-based Center for Children's Advocacy. This project advanced reforms to reduce unnecessary and disproportionate school exclusion, improve services for Connecticut's alternative school students to prevent dropout and provide legal representation to youth of color subjected to harsh school discipline, juvenile court delinquency matters, and unconstitutional targeting by law enforcement. He was also the lead facilitator and co-chair of Racial and Ethnic Disparities, RED committees, which address disparities in the juvenile justice system in 3 Connecticut cities, and an appointed member of the Connecticut Commission on Racial and Ethnic Disparities in the Criminal Justice System. In addition to his leadership of CFJJ since 2019, Leon has been active on a number of key coalitions and working groups in Massachusetts, including the Juvenile Justice Policy and Data Board, the Legislature's Emerging Adult Justice Task Force and School Resource Officer Memorandum of Understanding Commission, the Massachusetts Juvenile Justice Coalition, the Education Law Task Force, the Chapter 22 Coalition, the Statewide Connection on School Policing, and our JDAI working group to disrupt and eliminate the school to prison pipeline. Attorney Smith has lectured and presented on juvenile justice, criminal justice, and education related issues at local and national conferences and at colleges and universities both in and outside New England. Erin Stewart joined CFJJ in October 2021. She runs a Skadden Fellowship exploring systemic remedies on school discipline and school-based arrest issues, including drafting amicus briefs, advocating legislative reform, and pursuing systemic complaints at the state and federal level. Erin is a recent graduate from Northeastern University School of Law. While in school, Erin co-authored a study on the cradle to prison pipeline undertaken by jails and prisons across Massachusetts. Erin spent several years working in a public middle school in Seattle while earning her undergraduate degree in economics. Erin, Leon, welcome.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Joshua, and it's great to be here with you all. So my colleague Erin and I are going to give a presentation that gives some grounding for what you're going to hear today by just setting forth what the school to prison pipeline looks like in Massachusetts. Really quickly, Citizens for Juvenile Justice, we have been around since 1994, is the only independent statewide nonprofit organization working to reform and reimagine not just the juvenile justice system, but as an independent resource and policy organization, we look at the entire system, juvenile justice, as well as adjacent systems like school systems and the child welfare system that far too often take young people who are experiencing struggles and rather than addressing the root causes of those struggles, drive them into the legal and carceral system. So I'm going to hand off now to my colleague, Erin, who is going to share some data that really shows that we do have the school to prison pipeline operating here in Massachusetts.
To start, here is a definition of the school to prison pipeline. I'm going to pause for a couple of seconds for folks to read it. All right, moving on. We at CFJJ defined the school to prison pipeline as two concurrent pipelines, one that involves school discipline and the other that involves school-based arrests. These two pipelines operate simultaneously and in conjunction with each other to drive children toward negative educational and life outcomes. The school discipline pipeline involves frequent suspensions and expulsions that remove students from their learning environment. Once outside of school, these youth are then way more likely to be at risk of justice system involvement. So we see that youth are twice as likely to be arrested during periods where they are suspended or expelled from school. This increased likelihood of arrest actually applies both to students with and without prior juvenile justice involvement. The school-based arrest pipeline, on the other hand, involves arrest in schools for behavior that would be better resolved through a school discipline process. Students are arrested and sent into the system for levels of disruptive behavior that in many cases would be better resolved through restorative practices, peer mediation, holistic alternatives, rather than pushing kids away from school. We often get the question, does the school to prison pipeline operate in Massachusetts? Yes, it does. And it impacts students of color and students with disabilities the most. Black students are almost 3 times and Latino students 2 times as likely to be suspended as their white peers. Students with disabilities are suspended at 3 times the rate of their non-disabled peers. This pattern of exclusion even impacts the youngest of our Massachusetts children. Between pre-K and 3rd grade, Black students were 4.6 times more likely, and Latino students were 3 times more likely to be excluded than white students during the 2018 to 2019 school year. Contrary to media and popular beliefs that hone in on select violent incidences, more than half of school suspensions in Massachusetts are for non-drug, non-violent, and non-criminal behavior. The end result of these exclusionary practices, like suspension and expulsion, are that students miss a significant amount of time in the classroom. The statewide average for the number of days of instruction missed due to school discipline is 16 days for every 100 enrolled students in Massachusetts. This number then doubles to 32 days for students with disabilities and 34 days for Black students. The number for Black students is more than triple that of our students who are white. We see that these exclusionary practices have the harshest impact on young students. So we can see that between pre-K and 3rd grade, our kids are picking up building blocks that are crucial to their educational future. This is when kids are moving from learning to read to reading to learn. After preschool, the number of days of instruction escalate greatly with each grade. As we will talk about more later on in this presentation, children who are involved in the child welfare system also increase this risk of school exclusion. Child welfare involved students are 3.5 times as likely to receive an exclusion and 4 times as likely to be suspended out of school. Schools that suspend more students see a wide range of negative outcomes later in life, which include lower educational achievement, lower graduation rates, lower college enrollment rates, and higher involvement in the juvenile and adult criminal justice systems. We never accept the idea that something is just that something is just a suspension, because as you read here, one suspension can change a student's entire trajectory towards success. There are a lot of folks who will say that this isn't an issue in Massachusetts because of Massachusetts's low dropout rate. But if we look at that rate through an equity lens, it tells a different story. We see that low-income students drop out at 3 times the state dropout rates. Black students drop out at more than twice the rate of white students, and child welfare involved students drop out at 6.5 times the rate of students not involved in the child welfare system. I'll pass the baton back to my colleague Leon to finish us out.
Yes, so you're probably wondering, well, why do these disparities exist? And so we're going to go into some of the perceptions, biases, and stereotypes that drive them. Studies have looked at this, and they have found that these disparities can't be fully explained by differences in student behavior, that students of color are punished more severely for less serious infractions, and that they attend schools that rely more on harsh discipline than predominantly white schools. Also, Erin showed you that slide with younger students. Especially with younger students, behavior that triggers little to no response for white students often results in severe consequences for students of color. This was really driven home in a study called School Deferred that came out in 2019. This study involved school administrators that were given hypothetical incidents of student behavior. The names of students were then randomized to sound like they came from certain ethnic groups. In looking at this study, they found that the same exact behavior by Black students was rated more severely than when white students engaged in that behavior. These students were given more days of suspension. Worse, they were labeled as troublemakers, so when a second incident came up, they also received more severe sanctions. Again, same behaviors, more severe consequences for students of color. As we approach this day, we have to take the idea of Massachusetts exceptionalism and leave it at the door. People often say, well, of course we have issues, but we're not like those states. If you look at Black girls compared to white girls in racial disparities, and you compare it to one of those states, you will see that disparities impacting Black girls in suspension are exactly the same as they are in Alabama. With expulsion, the most severe consequences, our disparities are worse than they are in Alabama, and our rates of school-based arrests are comparable. We cannot simply lean on this idea that our reputation is sterling when the numbers show us something different. So now we're going to pivot and look at school safety and school hardening, because when we're talking about incidents of behavior and overall school climate and school safety, often the solution that gets parroted is we need more school hardening. So what am I talking about when I mention school hardening? We're talking about visible security measures which someone can point to and say, see, that thing, that shows that I'm doing something about safety. They're visible measures that are implemented in an attempt to alleviate concerns. But when you look at studies, including one that looked at 18 different years of research, they found that these type of measures, video cameras, bulletproof glass, metal detectors, school resource officers, failed to increase safety or reduce firearm violence. So Erin mentioned those 2 concurrent pipelines. I'm going to now hone in on that school-based arrest pipeline, and the one factor that is really central to driving that pipeline, and that is the policy choice to place police officers in school. Police placement in schools leads to the criminalization of young people, particularly young people of color, typically for relatively minor transgressions that were rarely viewed as warranting law enforcement intervention in the past. When you look at history, people assume that police have always been in schools. In the late 1970s, only 1% of schools in America had police officers in schools. And so this idea that, oh, two students got into a fight, this has to be a police intervention, is actually a new idea. But then again, when you put police officers in schools and you compare them to schools that don't, schools that have police officers report 3 times as many arrests as schools without police. Now, getting back to a point that was made earlier, what is considered criminal is not the same in all of our schools. How do we know that? From research talking to school resource officers themselves across rural, urban, and suburban districts, where that line between what is considered a school disciplinary matter and what is considered arrestable varies from school to school and from district to district, with schools that have a higher percentage of students of color, behaviors are more likely to be seen as arrestable or criminal. Put a pin in that. We're going to revisit that in a few slides. So just as Aaron mentioned with school discipline, who is most impacted and most harmed by this policy choice to put police officers in schools? Students of color, who you can see are greatly represented in school-based arrests. But school-based arrests are not the only harm of police placement in schools, as there's a growing body of research that shows that having police in schools is connected to poorer academic outcomes as well as poorer school climate. This is seen by tracking federal school policing grants, where those schools showed increases in discipline and decreases in high school graduation rates and college enrollment. And when you look at school climate, when students in a school see they themselves or they see their friends being subjected to surveillance, constantly watched, being searched and having seizures done, inappropriate sharing of confidential information happening, this creates an environment of fear and distrust and does the opposite of how SRO programs are marketed, in that it actually reduces the perceived legitimacy of police officers, weakens a sense of community, and actually, in some cases, tragically, diminishes students' trust in the adults in the building and makes them less likely to confide in school staff when they're experiencing problems. So stretching out beyond school policing very quickly to other forms of school hardening, we've heard metal detectors being advanced as a necessary component of school safety. However, when you look at research to support that they make schools safer, it is lacking. Over 15 years of research found insufficient evidence that putting metal detectors in schools decrease crime or decrease violence. And in some cases, young people going to a school and seeing a metal detector actually had a detrimental impact on their perception of safety. I want to hone in on this one because we need to look beyond just things like arrest and suspension to the psychological impact the school hardening has on young people. First, in looking at equity and bias, whether or not a school is majority of color is the predominant factor in whether or not that school has metal detectors. When a school has 50% or more of students of color, those schools are 18 times more likely to use a combination of metal detectors and other types of school hardening approaches. And how does that impact students? So students of color, when this happens, it actually delegitimizes the educational process, perpetuates racial inequities, weakens trust in governmental institutions because their decision makers are making the choice for these hardening approaches. And worse yet, it sends a harmful message to kids that when they're going to school with all of these hardening methods, and yet they look at kids in other districts that are not far away, that are majority white, that do not have these, it creates the perception that if you go to a majority white school, you have greater privileges and superior privacy rights. And that is the last message we should ever be sending to our young people. I end with this, and I ask you to read this because there are lots of opinions going back and forth, but one of the foremost experts on school safety and security in America said the following about school hardening. He basically termed them security theater that provide an emotional security blanket but not really making a significant difference. Very quickly, here are a set of resources that at CFJJ, we've conducted a great deal of research in this area. Please go to our website at cfjj.org to learn more about what we've presented about. And please feel free to follow us on our social media at CFJJMA. Thank you very much.
Leon, Aaron, thank you so much for providing so much information in a very short amount of time. That's kind of the theme of this summit, is a lot of information, keeping folks curious, getting folks to ask questions. Our next portion of our agenda is a panel discussion titled Dispelling Myths About the Juvenile Court System, which is going to be moderated by Elizabeth McIntyre from the Ed Law Project. Elizabeth joined the Ed Law Project in October 2021 as senior counsel. In this capacity, she trains and mentors children appointed counsel in delinquency and child welfare cases, and represents court-involved young people in school discipline and related special education cases. Prior to her work at the Ed Law Project, Elizabeth founded Greater Boston Legal Services School to Prison Pipeline Intervention Project, a project she began in 2014 with an Equal Justice Works Fellowship. One of the project's major achievements was the settlement of S.A. et al. V. Boston Public Schools in 2018. Through this settlement, Boston agreed to stop suspending its youngest students, limit suspensions for older students, and create long-term plans to support students with emotional disabilities and meaningful restorative justice. Elizabeth provides legal support and representation to student organizations and collaborates with organizations across the state to engage in systemic education policy, advocacy, and litigation. She graduated magna cum laude from the University of Missouri School of Journalism and Boston University School of Law, and is the recipient of the Supreme Judicial Court's Pro Bono Publico Award, the Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly Top Women of Law Leadership Award, and Boston University's Law School's Community Service Award. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining and moderating this really important conversation.
Thanks. Hi, folks. So let me take a second to introduce you to our panelists. So we have Leon, whom you just met. And we're also going to be joined by Judge Jay Blitzman and Carrie Zeldis. So Jay Blitzman is the former First Justice of the Middlesex Division of the Massachusetts Juvenile Court. He now consults on juvenile and criminal justice issues, mentors attorneys, and serves as the interim executive director of Massachusetts Advocates for Children. Prior to his judicial appointment, he was a founder and the first director of the Roxbury Youth Advancement Project, which is a community-based interdisciplinary public defender's office, which became a template for the creation of the statewide youth advocacy division. Jay was also a co-founder and board member of CFJJ and our RJ. Jay serves on the advisory boards of CFJJ, UTEC, and also works with More Than Words as a Massachusetts Access to Justice Fellow. He was a member of the ABA Youth at Risk Commission, the Boston Bar Association's Cradle to Prison Pipeline Steering Committee, and is the co-chair of the Massachusetts Bar Association Juvenile and Child Welfare Section. Jay also chaired the Massachusetts Juvenile Court Best Dispositional and Sentencing Practices Committee, and currently serves on the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court Standing Committee on Eyewitness Identification. He currently teaches at Northeastern University School of Law, Boston College, and Harvard Law School. Jay has published extensively on criminal and juvenile justice, including articles. I'm so sorry. I have to briefly interrupt this bio. I have a toddler, so I am just permanently sick. So apologies for the coughs, sniffles, etc. Hopefully they will not be too distracting. The Jay is the ABA Livingston Hall Juvenile Justice Award recipient and presents at various justice forums. And then lastly, we have Carrie Zeldis, who works with me at the Committee for Public Counsel Services, CBCS, our state's public defender system. Carrie is a staff attorney at CBCS in the Child and Family Law Division, where we represent children and indigent parents in juvenile courts in care and protection cases and child requiring assistance cases. This office covers 6 courthouses in Norfolk and Plymouth counties. And before coming to CPCS, Carrie was an educational specialist for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, ensuring compliance with special education laws and regulations. Carrie's legal and educational experience allows her to better advocate for her CRA clients who often have difficulties with school attendance and behavior. So we are all either lawyers or judges. Well, one judge. And we are here to talk a little bit about the juvenile court system and some of the myths that surround the juvenile court system. And specifically, we're going to talk about what you heard me mention in Carrie's bio, CRAs, child requiring assistance petitions, which can be filed by parents or by schools. And we often see folks in our practice at EdLaw and across the state file these petitions trying to get help for young people. And we think we want to sort of communicate what actually happens when those petitions are filed, because it's not help. So we're going to start off with Carrie to talk a little bit about what CRAs look like and what can be done instead of bringing young people into our court system. Carrie?
Thank you. So as an attorney practicing in the juvenile courts, I do handle a lot of CRA cases. As Elizabeth just mentioned, CRA just stands for Child Requiring Assistance, for those of you who are not familiar. And there are two types of CRA cases that would be filed by school officials. The first is called a habitual school offender. As the name implies, this is a student who repeatedly fails to obey school rules. The second type would be a habitual truant, and that would be a child who willfully fails to attend school more than 8 days in a quarter, and those would all need to be unexcused. So most commonly what I see are truancy cases. I think the most important piece of information that I can share today is that the courts are not service providers, and that a CRA is really not an appropriate way to get services for students. In fact, a judge can't order a child to comply with something under a CRA. They haven't committed a crime. But the schools can provide direct services and are in a far better position to make referrals for students and families. So some examples of helpful services would be, conducting a special education evaluation for students who are struggling. Maybe they have an undiagnosed learning disability. Maybe their parents are not familiar with the process and have never requested that evaluation. Maybe their social emotional disability is impacting their ability to attend school. Creating a 504 plan, sitting down with the student and the parent to come up with a solution that's unique to that child. So for example, I had a case recently with a student with an embarrassing medical condition, and she didn't want to come to school, a very young child. And they were able to come up with a code word to get her to get to the nurse's office. She was able to meet with the nurse, have a good relationship with the nurse, and she's doing great. And that's really all it took. But unfortunately, she had to go to court to get that. And really, the school should have been able to do that. Some other ideas that I've seen to be successful, an attendance buyback program. So for students who have missed a lot of days, if they can get to school, consecutively, they can earn those days back. And that really works well with students who feel hopeless, students who have missed, so many days. Modifying student schedules, maybe they can only come in, half a day, until they can sort of get back in. Extra time in the gym, whatever schools can be creative with their solutions, but getting these kids, back in school is what we really want to see. And lastly, just every county in Massachusetts has a family resource center, and those family resource centers are great at assessing a family's need for services, which often includes, individual counseling, in-home therapy, therapeutic mentors for students, coping with anger for teens, substance misuse, all kinds of, areas. And schools can make referrals to those valuable services. You don't need the court to do that. And it's not any faster if I was to make that referral. So those are just some of the things that I've seen to be successful. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, to underline kind of the last point Carrie made, it's that if what a student needs is a special education evaluation or a different special education accommodation or a different type of classroom, the court isn't going to be able to do anything about that. That's going to happen at the school. So we're now going to bring back Leon to talk a little bit about, if we have a sense of, okay, that's what a CRA can't do, to talk a little bit about what we see happening if a student is pulled into the juvenile court through a CRA.
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate what Carrie stated because it needs to be driven home. When I started practicing in 2000, 2001, people would always say, oh, well, just get the kid to the juvenile court and that'll get them some services. And all these years later, folks are still saying it when, again, the juvenile court is not a service provider. Most importantly, there's been research done which just affirms that sending a kid to the juvenile court does not provide any priority access to services. In fact, 20% of young people with a CRA petition receive zero supports or services. And when you look at specific types of programming that was sought under the CRA, that percentage is actually higher. So, the idea that just by filing the CRA then creates this magical secret pathway to get all these services, it simply isn't true. Just following up on what Elizabeth said, one thing that I've always found particularly troubling is a kid is struggling in school, they're struggling behaviorally, they're struggling with attendance. Really, there's evidence that there may be a disability. And rather than those issues being handled where federal law says they should be handled at the school level, they become the subject of a CRA. We know this because 41% of community-based referrals and 60% of school-based referrals list the need for an IEP or a 504 plan as the reason for the CRA. That's completely flawed because, again, the Child Find provision of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act states that schools have the affirmative and ongoing obligation to locate, identify, and evaluate children that have suspected disabilities. So when a school is sending a kid to a CRA because they need an IEP, they're kicking the can down the road and they're delaying the process, and they're really passing the buck for an obligation that ultimately lies with them. Furthermore, 30% of school-based CRAs, they identify need as an alternative or therapeutic school placement. Why? That is something that can only be handled by the school-based IEP team. Again, when we're debunking what the court can and can't do, that judge cannot and will not order a therapeutic special education placement because that is the responsibility of the school district, again, under federal law and our regs. So, and I want to just say this, I don't believe this is always a mean-spirited type of thing. I think there are times when people with the best intentions mention, well, maybe through this process, the court can help, but it's important that we get this information out. There are certain situations that a CRA can help with, but there's a lot of things they can't do. And parents and school staff and people working in the community need clarity on what they can and can't do, because you're actually delaying a kid getting what they need when you send situations to the court that the court isn't equipped to handle.
Thanks, Leanne. I want to there's a question in the chat asking if, a family, Jay, you're gonna handle? Okay, perfect. Judge Blitzman is gonna answer the question in the chat. So I'm gonna toss it to Judge Blitzman here to wrap us out and talk about the harm that can be caused by these filings, because we know they're not getting student services. So let's hear kind of what are they doing? Judge?
So it's really great to be batting cleanup on this wonderful panel. I'd like to start singing, I second your emotions, about so many of the points that have already been made. I got very, very excited when I saw LaToya's question. Here's the mythology about a CRA. A parent who files a CRA is actually filing a CRA if it's a stubborn child petition against their child, and they don't have a right to an attorney. They only have a right to an attorney if DCF custody becomes an issue. And I'm going to talk about the unintended consequences about DCF. But that's a great, great question. The person is being acted upon. The orders are being issued against the child. That's true in the context of truancy as well. So I understand the instinct, the concern, but I think the actuality does not play out the way the public may think. I've dedicated, to be candid, my career, both as an attorney, as a judge, and in my current advocacy, to combat the school and the cradle to prison pipeline. And the reason why this is so important, this relates to educational continuity. And the research is robust. Children who do not graduate high school are at exponentially higher risk of later entering the juvenile and criminal systems. Youth with disabilities, an area that I focused on during the past year at the Massachusetts Advocates for Children, who do not graduate, are 8 times more likely to enter the juvenile and criminal system. That, my friends, is the definition. That's the apotheosis of the school to prison pipeline. It includes a child welfare as well as educational prong. DCF research shows, CFJJ research shows, I apologize, Leon, work done by Kate Lowenstein, for example, that as regards dually involved youth, looking at a cut in time between 2010 and 2012, 72% of the youth in DYS had matriculated or been involved with DCF, contributing to what Jill Lepore, the Harvard historian, called a child version of the carceral state, a birth to prison pipeline. So the graduation rates and the outcomes, both in compromising positive youth development and the public safety ramifications that affect us all, are real, and the racial and ethnic disparities are overwhelming. In 2012, I went to a conference called Keep Kids in School and Out of Court. That was a national conference. That's the message today. Keep kids in school and out of court. Court is primarily traumatic. It is not a social service provider, and it should not be perverted into becoming a second-class social service provider. As regards what courts can do, courts sometimes I'll be honest, what I used to do, sometimes I would summons in educators. I would summons in educators to say, I may not be able to order you to fulfill your IEP. I may not order you to fill your 504, but it's the accommodation plan, but it's your responsibility. Educators have to educate their children in the classroom. What can happen, unfortunately, through a DCF, through a CRA or a care and protection case, it can be, the unintended consequence can be a pathway to the Department of Children and Families. And here's the message, friends. DCF has no services, what services does DCF have for preteens and teens? Really none. It becomes a form of de facto out-of-home placement, form of detention. It's a civil welfare, an analog to cruel and unusual punishment. Kids are in care, but there's no care. Some of you may have seen the recent Boston Globe Great Divide series looking about how children are treated in different school systems. One of the really, really poignant stories involves a woman, a mother, very well-intended, got a message from a school department, maybe very, very frustrated with her inability to educate this mom's kid, urged her to go to court and file a CRA, a child requiring assistance, stubborn child petition. She did that. The child sat, because DCF felt this child needed placement, for over 40 days in an emergency room, awaiting placements that didn't exist. So That's again the definition of cruel to prison pipeline, because it compromises educational continuity. Those are 40 days that 15-year-old boy loses his right to go to school. If there's a special ed entitlement, that should be honored, that should be enforced. We're having this conversation today, by the way, in the context of a national crisis in which the Congress has not reauthorized the IDEA since 2004. So we're seeing dramatic resource issues involving special education, which are driving more and more Black and brown kids into our systems of care.
Thank you so much, Judge. Sorry to cut you off here. This is the kind of thing we could talk about for so long, but I think time to roll on to the next group of folks. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and all. Really appreciate that important discussion. I'm excited to introduce a group that calls themselves the Golden Girls: Lorena Gondres, Carla Salinas, and Gabriel Brown, a team of 3 seniors at Margarita Muniz Academy, Boston's dual language high school, who we were connected through their teacher, Becca Romash, who's a 12th grade humanities teacher at the school. What started as a project for their English humanities class became a passion project for the trio. They dove into researching the school to prison pipeline, interviewing students from several Boston schools, and noticed patterns within the education system. Their hard work led them to present their findings to a member of one of the district's restorative justice team. As they continued to explore the issue, they realized it personally affects them due to their backgrounds and see it as a root cause of larger long-term issues. The Golden Girls are determined to fight for a solution to this problem, as they feel there aren't enough people advocating for change. Thank you all so much for being here, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Just so everyone can know, my name is Gabriel Brown.
My name is Carla. I'm Lorena Gondres.
And now we're going to show you guys our presentation.
Give us a second, guys. Give us a second.
Give 1 second.
All right, so the solution to the school to prison pipeline,
Brought to you by the Golden Girls
Lorena Gondres.
Gabriel Brown.
and Carla Salinas. So what is a school to prison pipeline? There is an unjust system in America that takes the students and turns them into criminals. The system doesn't do it so randomly, but it does target specific kids, children of color, and children who are physically or mentally disabled. They make these children and label them as illicit before they commit any actual crimes. This system is the school to prison pipeline, and it needs to be stopped.
Anyways, the first thing we need to consider is funding for the less fortunate schools. We understand that mentioning funding can be a little problematic, but these situations are dire and we need immediate action. With more funding to less fortunate schools, students will have more access to clubs, volunteer opportunities, and internships, and it can build interest among the students. This can benefit them because students will have a better time understanding what they would like to do outside of school. Students would also gain more independence and skills, as well as constantly being exposed to new passions they never thought they had. Some skills they would acquire are responsibility, integrity, communication, and collaboration. In the long term, these skills will give students better job opportunities to expand their career choices. Funding will also be beneficial to the teachers because they wouldn't have to rely on their income as much to do certain activities for the class. They would be able to expand the creativity of the students throughout the school with more decorations and events. More money could also help with more supplies such as art, books, math necessities, projectors, whiteboards, and etc. The next thing we should focus on that incorporates funding is training classes for the teachers. Within the funding, our second proposal is required training class that can inform teachers on the importance of treating students of color and who are also students who are disabled. These classes can guide teachers through handling certain students in certain situations, as well as teaching them the importance of the repercussions that come with inequality. With more knowledge, teachers are also able to have more confidence and experience to handle high pressuring situations, giving them a better ability to address a problem after the fact.
One of the techniques we can incorporate in their training is restorative justice. Restorative justice gives students a deeper understanding of their consequences and how their actions affect not only themselves, but other people. Our group conducted interviews of students who attended schools in Boston and started noticing patterns within the schools. We noticed three major trends, one being unequal consequences for students of color, another, students feeling that teachers didn't care if they were learning or not getting the extra help they needed. Lastly, we noticed that students were continuously doing the same action and getting the same consequences, but their behavior wasn't changing. Increased fundings and including restorative justice in teacher training would not only give teachers a better way of teaching and deeper understanding of students, it would also decrease the school to prison pipeline. This unjust system causes so many different situations. So if issues are fixed as a youth, it would stop the ongoing effects of the school to prison pipeline.
Overall, increasing the funding and including restorative justice in the teachers and training will not only give the teachers a better way of teaching and deeper understanding of the students, it will also decrease the school to prison pipeline. The unjust system causes situations. So if issues are fixed, it will stop the ongoing effects of school to prison pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Are there any questions?
Thank you all so much. We so appreciate your research and your advocacy. We might have time for one quick question if folks want to jump in briefly. I'm going to watch the chat here. I know that we'll definitely want to follow up and continue connecting with you in your journey and in this work. And again, just extending so much appreciation for you all and the work that you're doing. So Lorena, Carla, Gabriel, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for having us.
Next up, I'm excited to introduce Iman Hassan to talk about the dangers of exclusion. Iman Hassan is the director of the Stop the School to Prison Pipeline program at Massachusetts Advocates for Children. She has a significant experience practicing in fields of law which profoundly affect the lives of Black and Latinx children living in poverty, including family juvenile justice, special education, and school discipline law. She's a member of the Lawyers for Black Lives and actively organizes with the Black Lives Matter movement on racial justice issues. She works on the grounds with families supporting families against police violence to support Minnesota families who have been directly impacted by police violence. In 2019, she joined Innocent Classroom as a program teacher to change the public education system through the eradication of implicit bias and racial stereotypes which burden Black students. Iman has worked in grassroots organizing with youth around the issue of policing in schools and helped students successfully organize campaigns to rethink school safety. Perhaps most importantly, Iman has tremendous respect for young people and their families and recognizes the importance of centering their voices in decisions which impact their lives. Iman, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. And what a better way to go after students and youth and listening to their voices. I mean, this couldn't be better timed. Thank you so much for having me. I'm at Massachusetts Advocates for Children, where we focus on supporting families and advocating on their behalf when it comes to anything that is connected to disabilities and, in my field specifically, disciplinary issues. When it comes to the criminalization of children with disabilities, I would argue that it starts well before any disciplinary actions or big behaviors show up in the students' lives. I have many mental health practitioners in my family, one being an LMFT that focuses on autism and early childhood detection, another a PsyD MD at UCLA who focuses on psych evals. And what I have recognized is that the criminalization of Black children and non-white children or children from vulnerable populations happens as soon as we start the evaluation process. Many times the language that is used when we see evaluations done by OTs, by psychologists, when I see FBAs, really any evaluation that is part of the process before we ever meet for an IEP meeting, I can pick up on language that criminalizes children based on their identity. I can see when a Black child is spoken about in ways that is harmful, even by therapists, even by people who are professionals that are supposed to collect data in order for us to identify the needs of a child. So I would argue that before a child even enters the process of receiving the accommodations or being evaluated for which disability that they should require supports for, we see white supremacist structures and implicit bias that comes through in the ways that certain instruments are used that are inappropriate in order to collect data. I see it in hypotheses that are missing when we don't have data, and in psychological evaluations, in OTs and FBAs. I see FBAs that recommend safety plans that criminalize a Black child for behaviors that are a manifestation of their disability. And so I know I usually am very critical of administrations, superintendents, principals, sometimes teachers, but I think it's very important in this conversation that we're having to recognize that, and FBAs are functional behavioral assessments. My apologies, I'll stop speaking in acronyms. It's critical to think about white supremacist structures in every single moment that a child comes in contact with a professional, with an adult that is supposed to figure out who this child is, have a deep understanding, and bring that data to a team meeting in ways that is disconnected from that child's identity. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. And so as an advocate, it's critical for me to really look through all of these evaluations and see if I can see implicit bias coming through. If I see a child being described as dangerous, if I see behaviors being described with judgmental language that is loaded in narratives, that's at that point, that's already a critical moment to figure out how to get that out and collect new data points by having an independent evaluation or going back to the team and saying, why do you not have an hypothesis for this missing data point? Why did you describe this child in these ways that are really harmful? And I've had to do that in IEP meetings. And it's very uncomfortable for a lot of white folks to hear that this language you used is not disconnected from racial stereotypes. It's not disconnected from your inability to see this child as fully human and innocent and beautiful. And so I wanted to start there because that's the moment, the critical moment that later on decides if that child had all the support systems to show up in the ways that they need to show up, to be really, to prevent any disciplinary actions from happening. Another critical moment where we show up as advocates is in manifestation hearings. If a disciplinary action is started, children that have stay put IEPs are protected by having a moment to decide this big behavior, whatever it was that caused the principal to pause and send home a notice that says, we want to exclude your child. We need to first see this behavior, is that connected? Is it a manifestation of their disability? And so for all the teachers that are in this space, I really urge you to think critically when you write reports of an incident, because as human as we are, we sometimes also forget that the way we internalize what happened is never disconnected from our epistemology. So if you don't have an authentic relationship with a Black child, it's more likely that you'll see the interaction that caused you to write a report to be disconnected from a manifestation of the child's disability. Or perhaps you saw something as dangerous and violent and it dysregulated you. You are a dysregulated adult and you want someone to pay for the fact that you didn't feel good in your body. But it's really up to you to write a detailed report of saying, this is the antecedent. This is what I saw before the child became dysregulated. This is what I saw after. Every detail that you write down is going to be critical later on for the manifestation hearing to decide if this child acted in ways that is connected to the disability. So again, I really would state it's not always the admins. We have to take responsibilities as adults in buildings when we see behaviors and it immediately strikes us as dangerous, aggressive. What I hear a lot of times when I see these reports by teachers, anytime there's a Black child, I hear the voice was aggressive, it was loud, rambunctious, she hit me. I mean, the descriptions without actually pausing for a moment of where are these descriptions coming from and are they disconnected from the way that I see this child based on their race? So they're critical moments that seem like minutiae. They don't seem like violent ways of being racist. They are, if you pause and think about them, especially when we are in the field of disability. And then also just servicing children with disabilities. We know we have plenty of DESI data that shows that children, unfortunately, aren't given the same amount of services when they're Black, non-white, or come from families that don't have the same level of income and can advocate and come to every IEP meeting. There are multiple categories of identities that I could list here. We don't have enough time, that show that the way an IEP is serviced, the way that parents can show up and advocate, language barriers that I've seen evaluations that were never even translated a day before or even before the parent arrived. So we have a Spanish speaker, a mom, can't even read what these evaluations said about their child. So I would argue that the criminalization of children with disabilities happens with every procedural safeguard that is violated by school districts. And every single time a white teacher, or really any teacher, interacts with a non-white child and sees that child as anything other than the beautiful human that they are. So racism is in the details sometimes, and criminalization of children is definitely in procedural issues constantly. So as an attorney, that's what I pick up on every day. But unfortunately, not every child has an advocate in that space. So it's up to us, especially teachers and admins, to protect these safeguards because they mean a lot. And as Leon and the team before me said, every suspension counts. We at MAC, we deeply believe that short-term suspensions are as harmful as long-term suspensions. So thank you so much.
Iman, thank you so much for your wisdom, your insight, and your advocacy and your work. So value having you in this space today. I'm happy to welcome Catherine Tarka, who's going to provide us with some information and an overview of things that DESI is doing specifically to address school to prison and the topics that we're covering today. Catherine is the director of the Office of Literacy and Humanities at the Mass Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, where she leads a team dedicated to supporting excellent instruction for all students in Massachusetts in the areas of English language arts, literacy, history, social science, civics, and the arts. Prior to joining the state agency, Catherine worked in public schools in 3 states and the District of Columbia for 14 years, including traditional public schools and charter schools. In that time, she was a teacher, literacy coach, and curriculum director. She resides in one of Massachusetts' gateway cities where her children attend public school. She hosts a family daycare in her home, which serves 8 children ages 1 to 5. Catherine, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, for the great introduction. It's an honor to be part of this conversation. I'm going to attempt to share my screen, and Kelly or another organizer, if you could let me know if you see this, that would be appreciated.
Yep, we see it.
You see it. Great. Okay, thank you for the confirmation. And thank you again for the opportunity. I'm here to make a deeper connection to the issue of literacy, to the topics that are being discussed at this summit. And I will share some facts with you about reading and share some of what we're doing here at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education that is designed to support the literacy development of all our students. I want to start with a quote from Koichiro Matsuura. Literacy is inseparable from opportunity, and opportunity is inseparable from freedom. The freedom promised by literacy is both freedom from ignorance, oppression, poverty, and freedom to do new things, to make choices, to learn. Are you able to see the slide change?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to start with some facts about learning to read that I find motivating and hopefully you'll find interesting. I'm sure all of you here know that the ability to read is connected to a range of positive life outcomes. Reading ability has been linked to employment status, income, mental health, and involvement with the justice system. And if you're at this summit today, it's probably because you're aware of many of those connections between literacy and life outcomes. But I'd like to share some facts about learning to read that I hope will add additional context to the conversation about the actual reading acquisition process. So first, nearly all children can learn to read by the end of first grade with appropriate instruction. Secondly, children who don't receive the support they need to develop grade level word reading skills by the end of first grade almost never catch up. And finally, intensive reading intervention is much more effective for a 6 to 7-year-old than for a 9 to 10-year-old due to neuroplasticity. And these are scientific findings that are widely accepted among the scientific community that studies reading acquisition. And to share a little bit of data related to literacy as well from our state, Massachusetts is widely acknowledged as #1 among the 50 states in reading achievement. So for instance, the data that you see here is from the nationwide NAEP assessment, and it shows that Massachusetts 4th graders are pretty much at the top of the pack nationwide on this reading assessment. But I would like to point out that if you look at the numbers, only about 45% of our 4th graders are reaching proficiency on this assessment. So while it looks good that we're #1, only about half of, actually less than half of our children are actually meeting the standard for reading proficiency by grade 4. So we're #1 as a state, but I don't believe that we can be satisfied with less than half of our students on the path to academic success at the end of 4th grade. And it's critically important to also focus on the racial disparities in reading achievement in our state. White students in Massachusetts are supported to reach reading proficiency at double the rate of our Black and Hispanic students. And as you can see displayed in this graph, the Black and Hispanic students in Massachusetts reading proficiency is more similar to students in the lowest performing states in the nation than it is to white students here in the Commonwealth. So I'm here representing the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and the work that we're trying to do to advance literacy and advance equity in literacy in particular. We're very focused on addressing and eliminating these disparities. We're working towards a Commonwealth in which every student will develop the literacy skills needed by the end of grade 1, which we saw in those scientific findings as a crucial milestone, and that they will also continue to increase their literacy proficiency through the end of grade 3. In addition, and critically, we must also ensure that students in grades pre-K to 3 have affirming and enriching experiences with literacy in school, because reaching these milestones will place all students on track for long-term academic success. We're working towards this essential vision in partnership with educators all across the Commonwealth. And I do want to pause and thank the many educators that I know who are present here today. You're participating in this important conversation. You're doing amazing work with your students and for your dedication to supporting all your students to be successful. So schools across Massachusetts are engaged in this critical work to advance evidence-based and culturally responsive practices in early literacy. Many of you who are educators, at least, will be familiar with the name mass literacy. Mass literacy is the umbrella name for all the work we're doing at the state level on early literacy in particular. We support literacy instruction at all grade levels, but due to some of the scientific findings that I referenced earlier about the critical importance of reaching milestones early and how difficult it is to recover from poor instruction that leads to missed milestones early, we have a heavy focus on early literacy, making sure all students are set up for success by grade 1 and by grade 3. So mass literacy is the umbrella name for all the initiatives and supports that we provide around early literacy. And hopefully if you're an educator, you've heard that name before. The centerpiece of this initiative is the Mass Literacy Guide, which is a comprehensive set of guidance, resources, and offerings related to early literacy, hopefully providing educators with information they need to help all their students be successful. If you're an educator, I just want to give an extra shout out to the Mass Literacy Guide, which is our website, tons of resources that are evidence-based and vetted, best available information there for you. This is just one spotlight of what a piece of the Mass Literacy Guide looks like, but it's really extensive. And if you're an educator or you work in any kind of literacy education setting, I encourage you to check it out. I also wanted to give a brief spotlight to the Massachusetts Dyslexia Guidelines because we've spoken a lot today about the unique needs of students with disabilities who are particularly at risk of receiving poor, inadequate, or inappropriate instruction and thus not reaching those critical early literacy milestones. Dyslexia is one type of specific learning disability that often goes unrecognized or maybe recognized late, and that harms the ability of students experiencing dyslexia to reach their literacy potential. So if you're an educator, I do encourage you to consult these excellent guidelines to learn more about the precursors and markers of dyslexia and evidence-based practices for supporting children with dyslexia. And to wrap up, I just wanted to say a few words about the supports DESE is offering for schools and educators. There's a wide range of supports out there for educators to learn about and use evidence-based practices and culturally responsive practices that we know the best way to serve our children here in Massachusetts. In addition to the guidance and information that I've mentioned, DESE makes many professional learning options available for educators to engage in. And we have a lot of funding that's targeted at various expenses that we know schools face when they're trying to implement evidence-based and culturally responsive practices. So financial support to purchase the instructional materials needed, financial support to provide tutoring to students who may need more intensive instruction, et cetera. And I'm really happy to say that we are engaged in deep partnership with our institutions of higher education around the state to ensure that our new teachers coming into the profession receive cutting edge training on the most effective methods and the culturally responsive practices that we know all of our children need and deserve. So I will just conclude by saying thank you again for the opportunity, and that I believe that we must collaborate across roles and across sectors in service of students. I invite each of you to check out the department's resources. Please reach out if we can be of support to you, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Catherine, for being here and providing that information about some of the work that DESE is doing, and also highlighting some of the disparities in the data around Massachusetts attainment and literacy. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the work of the Massachusetts Education Equity Partnership, who released a report, number 1 for some, that really dives into the data of disparity across our Commonwealth and the work that's being done there. And that is a state and local and community-led effort. So thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to next introduce Liza Hirsch from the Office of the Attorney General, Andrea Campbell. Liza is the director of the Children's Justice Unit at the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office. Prior to joining the AGO, she was an attorney at Massachusetts Advocates for Children for 7 years, where she provided representation to low-income families in education matters and directed the program on disrupting the school-to-prison pipeline. She previously worked as a manager in the Holyoke Public Schools and as a staff attorney at the Massachusetts Law Reform Institute and at Medical Legal Partnership Boston, where she represented homeless and low-income families in housing and shelter matters. Liza also served on the board of a juvenile court restorative justice diversion organization for 5 years. She's a recipient of a 2011 Skadden Fellowship and a graduate of Northeastern University School of Law. Liza, thanks so much for being here today.
Absolutely. And can you hear me, Josh?
Yes.
Great. It's so great to be here with all of you. As was noted, my name is Liza Hirsch, and I'm here representing the Massachusetts Attorney General, Andrea Joy Campbell. As many of you may know, Massachusetts is consistently ranked first or second in the country in terms of overall education ranking. But you may or may not know that Massachusetts is ranked among the worst in terms of racial equality in education. Stark educational inequities continue to exist in Massachusetts on the basis of race, income, disability, and English learner status. As has been alluded to, in Massachusetts, less than 1 in 3 Black and Latinx 4th graders are on grade level in reading. That's half the rate for the state's white students. Less than 1/3 of low-income 8th graders are on grade level in math. Roughly 1 in 3 English learners don't graduate on time, and 1 in 7 drop out of school entirely. As we've been discussing here today, nationwide and in Massachusetts, students of color and students with disabilities are more likely to face punitive and exclusionary discipline practices which are linked with poor academic outcomes. And Black and brown students, particularly those with disabilities and mental health challenges, are more likely to be suspended, expelled, and arrested in school, and in turn, more likely to drop out of school and become involved in the criminal justice system. We also know that student mental health challenges and educational inequities have only worsened during the pandemic. And this means, from the perspective of our office, that our collective work to support our young people is both more challenging and more important than ever. Attorney General Andrea Campbell stands ready to advance equity and justice for the children and youth of Massachusetts and to do our part to end the school to prison pipeline. Our office firmly believes that there are no bad children. Children are learning, their brains are developing, and it's essential that all children are supported to learn. And it's also essential that educators have the support that they need to meet the range of complex needs presenting in their classrooms. Our office will work to ensure that Massachusetts schools are places where every child is in school, embraced as a valued member of the school community, and supported to learn, develop skills, and grow. I wanted to provide one concrete resource today from our office. Our civil rights complaint line receives complaints involving discrimination on the basis of race, disability, and a range of other protected categories. Discrimination in public schools may include patterns of disparate disciplinary practices based on race, disability, or other protected class. And anyone can file a complaint online. Kelly, if you wouldn't mind dropping the link to our complaint line in the chat. This is a civil rights complaint line. Really encourage folks to file complaints related to discrimination as regards disciplinary practices. The Attorney General in our office looks forward to partnering with youth. It was so great to hear from you, Carla, Gabriel, and Lorena. And we look forward to partnering with families and communities, advocacy organizations, schools, educators, state agencies, and other stakeholders toward our shared goal of ending the school to prison pipeline and creating a Commonwealth that provides the best public education, not only for some students, but for all students. Thank you, and I'll turn it back to you, Josh.
Thank you so much, Liza, for being here and representing the work of the AG's office and your advocacy. The next portion of our agenda, I'm excited to be sharing some information around the connection between literacy and the school to prison pipeline from Hildebrand Peltzer III. With over 3 decades of experience, Hildebrand has drawn on his powerful educational foundation to build an exciting resume as an educator, an inspirational speaker, and a leader. He has excelled in his role as an assistant regional superintendent, a principal, an assistant principal, and a physical education teacher. The beginning of Peltzer's leadership in the education field started when he became Philadelphia's youngest high school principal during the early 2000s. However, Peltzer's greatest accomplishment in a career that included leading 5 different schools was arguably in one of the largest prison systems in the United States, the Philadelphia prison system. Here, Peltzer made a significant impact by exemplifying a pivotal shift towards a leadership style characterized by high expectations for all incarcerated youth. Peltzer raised expectations in the Philadelphia prison system by using all the resources at his disposal to change the system's entire culture and by demonstrating that incarcerated youth can learn. Leveraging his distinctive lessons learned inside jails, Peltzer teaches his audiences how to raise expectations for all students. Though Hildebrand was not able to join us today, he pre-recorded his talk, so I am going to share that with folks. So bear with me as I do the whole screen share thing. And Kelly, let me know if that is up.
Yes, you're all set.
Great.
One day at the Philadelphia Industrial Correctional Center, I was frightened by a frantic adult male inmate. You see, I was walking from the minimum security side to the maximum security side of the jail. And he confronted me out of nowhere after eyeing me walking through the medical service area, which was a shortcut that connected both the minimum and maximum security sides. His facial expression was scary. He was a large guy. His voice was deep. His tone was demanding. In fact, he said, "Mr. Principal, I need your help right now." As the principal and GED examiner of the Philadelphia Prison System's public school, I initially thought he might be having a problem with the enrollment process and just needed my help with the referral. So I began to explain to him the enrollment steps. But in the middle of my explanation, he cut me off and yelled, "No, Mr. Principal, I'm not having that type of trouble. I'm still in the damn hooked on phonics class, and I want to get my GED. Now, while I could understand and certainly feel this inmate's frustration, I had to think hard about what to say. I did not want to say the wrong thing and have all hell break loose in the jail. The reality is that I could provide nothing but the truth. I knew he could not go from learning phonics to a GED in a short time. His frustration was neither with me nor with the Hooked on Phonics class. What frustrated him was that he was carrying the burden of a lifetime of illiteracy. Now I'm going to come back to that story in a few moments, but first let me formally say hello and introduce myself. I am Hildebrand Pelzer III, an educator who has spent the past 3 decades working in urban education, and I'm the author of Unlocking Potential, Organizing a School Inside a Prison. I wrote Unlocking Potential to inspire educators, especially teachers, to use their superpowers to keep students out of jail. My story about my encounter with the frantic adult male inmate that frightened me in the area connecting the minimum and maximum security size highlights the persistent problem of children who grow up never learning how to read. This adult inmate's plight represents what it could look like for children if we don't get reading instruction right. It highlights the connection between literacy and the school to prison pipeline if we don't support children early who struggle with reading. His emotional exchange with me revealed how reading instruction had gone so wrong for him, and it amplified how it goes wrong for many children every day. At the age of 55, this inmate was a beginner reader. He was enrolled in a phonics program, which indicated that he had never been taught the relationships between letters and sounds. He did not master the alphabet. He could not decode or recognize words. His enrollment in a phonics program also indicated that he was just learning letter patterns and how to combine syllables with more complex sounds and syllable patterns, as well as how to manipulate syllables and sounds in words. Even more alarming is that his school likely missed the early warning signs that he was a struggling reader, or perhaps a child who suffered from dyslexia. His school either did not identify him as needing reading support and intervention, misunderstood the early warning signs, or just plain ignored them. Perhaps they did not know how to help him. Either way, no one did. At 55 years old, this African-American adult male inmate still could not read. His frustration with his own illiteracy fueled his courage to ask me for help. He wanted to complete his education. He wanted an opportunity to attend classes to earn a GED. He wanted to know how to do it. He wanted to learn how to read. He did not give up. My experience with this inmate is cemented in my brain. To me, it represents why it is important to identify children with reading difficulties in their early years of learning. Juvenile justice administrators and educators, K-12 superintendents, administrators, and teachers, counselors, social workers, and others working across systems to address the realities of the school to prison pipeline should do the following. Understand the close connection between early literacy and juvenile delinquency. Advocate for early literacy learning, specifically among Black students and students of colors. Get the perspective of incarcerated youth and get access to high-quality structured reading instruction to children who struggle to read, write, and spell, and who do not have the means to access high-quality reading instruction. Taking these steps to help will ultimately help struggling readers foster their enjoyment of reading and ultimately improve their reading outcomes. So thank you, Joshua, and everyone involved for inviting me back to participate in Cultivating a School to Possibility Pipeline, the second summit of disrupting and eliminating the school to prison pipeline in Massachusetts. Thank you.
All right. Next up, I am very excited to welcome one of our working group members, Edith Bazil, to talk about literacy as a tool for liberation. And one second as I get my screens working again, and I will read Edith's intro. All right, Edith, welcome. Growing up poor in Roxbury, Edith Bazil learned early that being Black and female made her invisible in Boston public schools. Despite stern discouragement from her teachers, she aspired to pursue a career in education to change the narrative for her, her 13 siblings, and peers. As an educator, she found her voice of advocacy, but quickly learned the same barriers that existed for Black students existed for Black educators. She forged change as a BPS special education lead teacher, was awarded a Service Excellence Award for providing high-quality professional development and merit status for teaching in the Graduate School of Education at UMass Boston. As Senior Program Director for Special Education district-wide, she provided literacy training for both special education and general education teachers in the use of evidence-based literacy interventions as part of a 3-tiered framework. Edith designed and taught special education courses at the Boston Teacher Residency BTR program and Boston Public Schools Pathways program in moderate disabilities. She has facilitated workshops for parents at BPS Parent University. After 32 years in Boston Public Schools, Edith continues to fight for racial justice and equity in education as a consultant, currently working with Brockton Public Schools. Edith is founder and executive director of Black Advocates for Educational Excellence, past president of Black Educators Alliance of Massachusetts, and former education co-chair of the NAACP. Her work centers on literacy, multi-tier systems of support, and special education. She seeks educational justice for Black and Brown students and collaborates with multiple agencies and serves on several boards, steering committees, task forces, and panels, including DESE. Edith, thanks so much for being here and welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here, and thank you for that gracious introduction. I also want to thank Catherine for the data on literacy and the previous speaker as well. I think, Joshua, you're going to do the slide deck for me. I'm not sure.
Yes.
And while you're pulling that up, I just want to say that I have a little request from the audience, because I would like some audience participation at some point. So I hope I get some volunteers. So while Joshua is pulling up the slide deck, I just want to say that we know that throughout centuries, Black people have used literacy as a tool to elevate our futures. And Black students are still seeking liberation regarding literacy today. Frederick Douglass said, "He who reads will forever be free." And that rings true today. And I also want to just uplift Mel King, who was a fierce leader in Boston Public Schools for racial equity and justice. We just lost him yesterday. And I just want to just amplify that he has been such a powerful influence on my life. I didn't know him personally, but I admired him for many years. And one of his goals was to improve literacy for Black and Brown students as well. We know that literacy is power. And when students are able to read, they're able to lead their lives. I went to Northeastern also. Someone, I think it was, said they went to Northeastern. I think it was Erin. And I did some tutoring. I did an internship, and I went into the prisons and tutored Black men primarily who had been incarcerated since 15 and didn't know how to read. And so I also worked with individuals who were in rehab programs. Next slide. And so as we think about our students, we know that literacy is very critical. It is foundational to school success, but we also have to attend to students' socio-emotional needs. We talked a little bit about restorative justice in some of the previous presentations, and we need to focus on, where students are and how we can engage and ignite and excite their enthusiasm in books that reflect who they are. Next slide. Alfred Tatum has done a lot of research in terms of what he calls enabling texts. And we know that that's really, really important. Enabling texts allow students, they encourage and empower young people to take action in their own lives and in the lives of others, both literary and informational texts. And according to Alfred Tatum, enabling text encourages readers to define themselves, to find a text with language that helps them put their voice on record without waiting for others to define who they are. it also helps students to become resilient and also engage others and build their capacity to create a foundation on which they have a future goal. I found books as a young child in BPS very encouraging for me, just thinking about what the possibilities were for my life. But we know that 20%, 1 in 5 students struggle with reading, and that's something that we have to tackle. There was a mention by Catherine that students in general are not reading at a high level, and there's a population of students who are left behind. And there's an old saying, when it rains in white America, Blacks and brown students are drowning, and they are drowning in literacy. Next slide. And so I want to kind of echo that how we teach makes a difference. And if we know that 20% of our population is not reading, picking up literacy skills, reading skills in early literacy, then that tells us that we need to do something different. And that has not happened, particularly for Black and brown students. In Boston Public Schools, 80% or more of Black, Latino, English learners and students with disabilities do not read on 3rd grade level by 3rd grade. And for students with disabilities, it's the highest. It's 88% are not reading on grade level. Next slide. And so here's a chart that really lays out the challenges. In reading, we have these low-level automatic perceptual skills like decoding and handwriting, spelling, grammar rules, math fact memory, memory for data. Those are some of the barriers to developing early literacy skills. And often students, if they struggle in those areas, we might think that they're not able to do those higher order thinking skills that are critical to passing the MCAS. This is where the MCAS test, the listening comprehension, the reading comprehension, problem solving, and thematic maturity. So I want to kind of give an example of what this looks like. Next slide. So I want you to think of, we've been here for a while. What would you rather be doing other than sitting here listening to this conference? I think it's wonderful, don't get me wrong, but my son flew this morning to the Dominican Republic, and I would have loved to be on the beach. But I want you to think about this. When you are on a plane and there's some turbulence, if you're reading something and all of a sudden there's some turbulence, just think of, and I'm sure some of you may have experienced this, just think of the interruption that occurs in your ability to focus on what you're reading. And so reading becomes difficult if you're struggling emotionally or if you're distracted by a critical incident that happens. If you're in a car and all of a sudden there's an accident in front of you, you may be driving, you may be, sipping your coffee, listening to some music, but if there's an accident, all of a sudden everything shuts down. So I want to kind of walk you through what it feels like to have experience a challenge with reading and literacy. Next slide. So in thinking about brain-based learning, think about a dog scanning his environment. And there are 3 switches in terms of the whole learning process. Think of a toggle switch that has 3 different positions. Next slide. If students are in that high position, they are in a fight or flight situation. And so if we engage them in literacy and don't give them the appropriate supports and address their needs, students are unable to function, going back to that sort of turbulence. You're on a plane and there's some turbulence. Often students with disabilities who are not provided with appropriate learning strategies or accommodations experience this. It doesn't mean that they're not able to function or express themselves at a higher level, but if we don't give them the appropriate support to address those low-level automatic perceptual skills, they may struggle. English learners, when they are not provided with ESL, SEI, or native instruction, will also struggle. And often, because teachers have not been prepared or instructed in how to teach reading in higher education, that is a problem. Next slide. The other opposite end, so this is a second switch, the low position. If students are not engaged in higher level work and we continue to say, for example, they're delayed, so we give them a lower level text, that is not helpful either. Students need a different type of instruction. So I want to give you a few examples of what that looks like in a moment. But we find students are disengaged because we are not providing them with the appropriate supports to do on grade level or higher work. Next one. And so this is where we need to operate with students in that middle position. We call it the, when students are in that metacognitive learning mode, where there's cortisol arousal, they're able to be connected with the learning. And it really has to do with not only having them in the right curriculum, but also ensuring that we're providing the appropriate supports. Next one. Okay, so I'd like someone, a volunteer, if you could read this passage, that would be great. Anyone want to unmute and just read this aloud?
I could do it.
Thank you.
Got you. Hey, people, according to research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be in the right place.
Yes.
The rest can be a tool. I'm be honest, English is my second language. Es difícil. This is hard.
Yo puedo ayudarte si quieres. Yo puedo ayudarte. The rest can be a total mess and you can still read it without problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole.
Thank you so much. So what did I do with this passage? The code is changed. So you can read, but I mixed up the letters a little bit. And so there was some frustration there. And so when you're focusing on what the words say, as opposed to what the word means, then you're not addressing or you're not engaged in those 5 pillars that I showed before. If I broke the code down more, because you either are an English learner or you have not been exposed to literacy or there's been gaps in your schooling, then it will become more difficult. But just imagine if you did read like this, and you read that fairly well, but if you had to read a whole book, then think about what you would need in terms of support in order to sustain and persist in reading that novel. And so my point is that there are different forms of dyslexia. Students that do not get the right interventions, they may be able to read okay in your eyes, but if you don't do early screening, which Catherine mentioned, for students who are very young, then as students get older, then they hit a brick wall. And this brick wall becomes larger and larger and more insurmountable. Next slide. So here's a different problem. So I want everyone to kind of look at this list of words. All of you can read these lists of words, right? And so there are no words that you can't read. So if I put these words in a passage, you'll be able to tell me exactly what it means. And this is when I need another volunteer. So let's go to the next slide. Would someone volunteer to read this aloud? Just unmute yourself.
I can do it.
Thank you.
If the known relation between the variables consists of a table of corresponding values, the graph consists only of the corresponding set of isolated points. If the variables are known to vary continuously, one often draws a curve to show the variation.
Okay, so raise your hand if you know exactly what this means, because you could read all the words. Can someone unmute and just tell me interpret this passage or the topic? What is this talking about? Mark? Mark, if you can.
Bell curve?
Yeah, so what do you need to know in order to understand this passage?
It would probably be helpful to have a graph that actually shows it rather than just to have the words. Like showing a bell curve would actually be really helpful to understand what is trying to be said here, I would think.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. You have to know something about math. So this is where you need to have some content knowledge. And so what I'm showing you is different forms of where students struggle. A lot of times we think that when students struggle with reading, they struggle with decoding. It's not always decoding. It could be something else. And we need to meet students where they are. And again, this is why it's important to do these screenings and assessments so we understand where students struggle and not allow them to hit a brick wall. And that brick wall is often predicated by some behavioral issues. And when it's Black and brown students, those students are highly disciplined, as we heard from Leon and Erin and others. And that's where we get that school to prison pipeline. Next one. I have one more. So if another courageous person could read this aloud, please.
I can do it.
Thank you. Thank you, Kat.
Last Cerny, Flingle, Dobe, and Preben were in the nerdlink treppering gloopy caples and cleaming burly grips. Suddenly a ditty strazzle boofed into Flingadope's tresk. Preben glaped and glaped. Oh, Flingadope, he chifed, that ditty strazzle is turning in your grip.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. When did this happen?
Whatever day Cerny is.
Yeah, last Cerny. Very awesome job. And who was doing the boofing?
A ditzy strazzle?
Yeah, so my point is here, you can answer the questions. You read this passage, but do you have any idea what it means?
Not a clue.
So this is where you get into, you don't understand any of this, but often we have students to read and we'll ask them what we call is right there questions, and they pull information out, but they're not getting anything from the text. So this is another area where we need to probe what students' literacy skills are, because it is about reading, but it's also about comprehension, it's about vocabulary, it's about all of it. In the first passage, I interrupted your fluency because I mixed up the code and you had to slow down and figure out what it was. The second one, it was the content. So these are all of the areas of literacy that we need to have huge knowledge about in terms of where students are. Next slide. Now, this one is if we do not capture students, and Catherine stated, yes, after third grade is difficult. Why? Because we switch from learning to read to reading to learn. And so students, if they're not taught to decode, which is a fluent skill, none of us really think about, for example, riding a bike. We don't think about pedaling, steering. What we do is we enjoy our bike ride. We don't have to look at our feet or figure out where the brake is. We use our muscle memory, it's automatic. But with students who have not been taught to decode, who learn words from sight, they'll see a word like this and they'll say, oh, it starts with a PH and then it goes down to an O, it goes up and down. And the first word that comes to their mind will be, they're looking at the word as if it's a picture. And so they'll say photography because it looks almost the same, but it's not the right word. And that's where our students fail as well. Next slide. So would someone read this aloud? Just a quote.
I got you.
Thank you.
Once social change begins, there is no turning back. You cannot take away the education of someone who is educated. You cannot take away the alphabet from someone who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate a person who feels pride. You cannot oppress a people who are not afraid.
Thank you. That was wonderful. My point is that literacy achievement for Black, Latino, English learners and students with disabilities is significantly lower, not because they don't have the ability, but it's because we're not capturing them early. We're not using tier 1 curriculum that'll address all of those areas that I outlined. The tier 1 curriculum needs to be robust, but it also needs to be aligned with the demographic population of students, and it needs to be evidence-based. We have a system called Curate and Ed Reports where curriculum is vetted, and if it's not vetted, then it's not evidence-based. And evidence-based means that if you use this curriculum for this particular population, you're going to get favorable results. And that's really critical that districts look at curriculum in terms of capturing at least 80% of students, because if you look at an MTSS model, you want a curriculum that is going to address the needs of 80% of your student population. If it does not, then you're going to have far too many students who require interventions or also may end up in special ed. So some of those areas that we just looked at are areas where students fail. It's not only about decoding, it's also comprehension, it's fluency, it's all of the 5 pillars. And we need to make sure early on that students are understanding the sound symbol association, but also are able to pick up vocabulary, gain meaning, and be able to write, because writing is the culminating piece where we measure how well they are reading. And that is part of being able to participate in the MCAS. So it's really important for our students to have grade level support. And in many districts, what we see is we see students who appear to be doing okay, but if you don't screen them well, you don't know that they're struggling. They may be memorizing passages, guessing based on context. And so again, that tier 1 curriculum is so critically important. There are far too many Black and brown students who do not get the intervention. Dyslexia is seen as something is for the privileged, and it's a disability category classification where if you have the resources, then you can get the interventions. And so there is a lot of racial disparity in terms of students who struggle with reading, who are Black, who are brown, who are Latino, who are English learners, and they end up with the disability category because they have not had that early intervention, and they also have not had the recognition that they have dyslexia. Dyslexia only impacts 20% of the population, but yet if you look at the population, for example, in Boston Public Schools, 22% of students in Boston Public Schools are in special ed, and that's where you have that disparity. And it's because of the lack of early intervention and the MTSS, the multi-tiered systems of support that are evidence-based. And my last point that I want to make is that we know that the literacy rates for Black and brown students in Boston in particular have been stagnated for over 2 decades. And it's not the students. It is looking at the curriculum. Many of the students who are in programs for emotional impairment, it's because I'm struggling with reading. It's frustrating. If I push and push and push you to read a passage that is difficult for you and you're not able to do it, then you're going to act up at some point because school is not working for you. You're there 6 hours a day and you're smart, and you see students doing something that is automatic that you're smart and you could do it, but you can't, and you're not getting help. And our students end up in these special ed segregated programs and they still don't get the literacy support. And that's the injustice that happens in school districts. And that is what needs to change, along with having more Black teachers, having bilingual teachers, and ensuring that we have reading specialists in every school and who can be accessed by students who require it, whether they are in special ed or not. And so I just want to end on that point. Thank you so much for those who volunteered.
Thank you so much, Edith.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I can never cut you off. Amazing presentation. Thank you so much. I'm going to try and play a little bit of catch up here with our time as well, but I'm very excited to introduce Robert Hendricks, the founder and chief executive officer of He Is Me, an organization that helps education institutions build Black male teacher pipelines beginning in preschool and spanning throughout their careers. A great tie to what Edith was just closing on. Robert's a former teacher and school administrator in Boston, has been featured on Good Morning America and CNN for his leadership and impact impact to bring and keep more Black men in classrooms. Robert also influences education policy as an active committee member of Latinos for Education and the Massachusetts Education Equity Partnership, both shaping education policy across the Commonwealth, primarily focusing on the Educator Diversity Act. In 2021, Robert was recognized by Miami University, his alma mater, for his national impact in social justice, and now he serves on the university's Alumni Advisory Board. Committed to the community, he is a member of Alpha Fraternity, Inc., and continues to provide direct service to children as a speaker, presenter, and volunteer, such as serving on the governing board of Lila G. Frederick Middle School. Robert, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Josh, and JDAI, and Edith, and everybody else before me for all these learning. There's a lot of connections. So I see what we did here, putting these pieces together. I appreciate it. So I'm talking about the same topic from the lens specifically of Black male teachers and how we can lean on that often missed lever to improve educational outcomes for students and build pathways to possibility and prosperity. Before I jump in, Josh introduced me. I, as he said, worked at a school for some time before launching this organization, which was mostly based off of my experience as a Black male student and a Black male educator. And it was affirming and sad to find out how much my story rings true for other people. And I'm here to share some of this with you and how we could navigate these situations. So first, we all need to get on the same page about something I call the Black male teacher effect. And it is just the understanding that Black males address a lot of the issues that have been brought up today. Their students do well in school. They get some of the intellectual support, the academic support, the emotional support, the cultural support that's been mentioned today. They tend to graduate at higher rates and go on to college if that's the route they want to take. And that's even more true with Black students, even more true with Black male students, and even more true for Black male students who experience persistent poverty. So when we get more Black males in a classroom, we're already, just from that alone, addressing a lot of the issues that we talked about today. And then this last bullet here, teachers are inspired by their teachers. About half of educators would say that they were inspired by their teacher. So what are our Black boys saying when we don't have Black men in the classroom, or when we do have Black men in the classroom? So that's something I want you to keep in mind as we continue this conversation. So currently, there are two big buckets of why we don't see Black men in the classroom at the rate that we should and could and that the students deserve. And first is poor retention strategies. Students do not get the benefit to learn from Black male teachers. So all of that Black male teacher effect that I just talked about, it's only true for a small handful of students because 1.3% of teachers nationally are Black males. A lot of Black males are interested in teaching, but for one reason or another, at some point in their path, they go a different route. Either they didn't start the job at a school, although they completed some kind of education program, or they start and they leave. And there's a lot of factors built in there, the mistrust from school leaders, misunderstanding, stigmas that we place on Black males, the lack of development that they need in order to be better at their work. And then workplace conditions, which is really, really broad, but it's everything from the school environment to teacher pay, to the perception of what it means to be a teacher. So all of these together leads into poor retention. And I like to start with retention. A lot of people think about that as the second thing, but we have to first keep the Black male teachers that we have. We have to stop the bleeding before we could try to figure out how to make it better. So that's number one, is retention. Number two is recruitment. And we think about recruitment from the earliest experiences that these Black males have with school. We heard about a few times from a few different people today, suspension rates, expulsion rates, and that stuff starts early. I think it's about 45% of preschoolers who are suspended are Black boys. So very early on, we're starting them on that trajectory of another suspension and an expulsion, and then having some kind of interaction with the juvenile justice system. Even if they don't go that path, we've given them a poor taste in their mouth early on. And that's not a really good recruitment strategy if we know that when he grows up, he can have a tremendous impact on student learning. Yeah, so not only is the support in terms of what the Black males, the Black boys get, the academic support isn't there, the cultural support isn't there, but the expectations are also really low for students of color, particularly Black boys, and they're overrepresented in special education. So I really appreciate the last conversation a few moments ago about Tier 1 instruction and how that can be a solution. So we need to start there. Are we even teaching our Black boys in the way that we should before we start thinking about interventions or pushing them out or excluding them from the learning environment? So I want to talk about how we actually combat this. And there's a framework that is true for teachers generally. I'm going to frame it in the terms of Black male teachers, given their specific and unique impact that they have on students. And we call this process at He Is Me Institute, we call it the 4 E's. And it's experience, exposure, expansion, and exploration. So with that first bucket, when students can experience the intellect, the cultural diversity, the pedagogical approaches, the relationships, the inspiration that they get from Black males, they're already doing better in school based on the research. And having that experience as a Black boy, having that experience learning from a Black male, is also giving him a mirror into the profession. He can see himself in that role, which is secondary to his actual learning. And it is still true that if we want to start recruitment early for Black male teachers so that they can have the impact, we need to think about how we're visioning our elementary school students as our future teachers. So that's the E, the first E. The next one is exposure. And that's letting students or giving students the opportunity to try out teaching early and often. Middle schoolers can be tutors and teacher assistants, and they can learn what it's like to actually lead learning that early. We can do the same thing in high school. We can do the same thing in college. We see a lot of teacher residencies that supports teachers of color, and I'm going to speed it up here to catch up on time. Expansion is around their teaching skills and not the general professional development that everybody gets. If we have just over 1% of teachers who are Black males, what are the chances that their professional development is truly geared towards and centers them? Probably not true. So we need to give them very specific and unique development. And the last piece is exploration, allowing them to explore their identities and bring it into the classroom and into the school culture. So it's not having a Black male in the building so you can say you have a Black male, but also inviting in his perspectives to the conversation as well. I'll give you a quick example of how we do it at He Is Me Institute. The way we do the experience piece was with our Black male teacher initiatives. Any institution or individual who touches the life of a Black male in any holistic way can be a part of this initiative. I'm talking about, yes, colleges, districts, families, but also can a bank support with the home buying process or down payment assistance? That plays a role in a Black male wanting that job because now he could provide this thing for himself and his family. We can talk about financial literacy. We can talk about how we are consulting and supporting schools and districts to be better at supporting their Black male teachers. We have the He Is Me Fellowship, which is for college students who are Black males to learn more about education, to get some authentic experiences. Expansion, so our Black male teacher network is any Black male, current teacher, former teacher, aspiring teacher, to have not only an affinity space with each other, but also have opportunities for development geared towards them. And that's where some of those third party or secondary supports come in. And then lastly, our Reclaiming Our Identity workshops is for Black males to learn more about self and how it shows up in society, particularly as it pertains to becoming and remaining a teacher. The impact of these 4 E's starts very early and goes throughout their lives. In the short term, we're getting more success with Black boys in schools. Medium term, we have more students matriculating into the teaching profession. And then later, we're going to start to see that impact of increased graduation and college enrollment. So what you could do is set a goal about what you want to do about this problem, understand the landscape, and I mean the needs of the Black males. This is not a Black male problem to solve. This is a systemic problem to solve. So you need to understand their needs. Come up with a collaborative strategy. You cannot and should not do this alone. Invest and allocate resources. The number of institutions who say they care about this, but then don't have a strategy behind it, that happens all the time, every day. So actually invest. And then implement and track your progress. Know what you need to do to make it better for the future. I'm gonna leave you here with that really quick. Again, Black male teachers matter. We will focus on recruit, retain, and retire Black male teachers at He Is Me Institute, along with a bunch of partners that we have. I would love to talk to any and all of you at another time. I appreciate you being here. Thank you, Josh, and everybody else.
Robert, thank you so much for sharing and for the work that He Is Me is doing. I don't know about everybody, but I'm feeling like this is flying by. We are moving towards our 6 o'clock hour. Do the stretch or whatever you need to do. We're gonna continue pushing through our panel discussions. I'm really excited to introduce a youth panel discussion that's going to be moderated by Jilly Santos. Jilly joined Citizens for Juvenile Justice in 2022 as the community engagement coordinator, supports young people in communities and grassroots organizations across Massachusetts through cultivating relationships, coordinating information sessions, facilitating conversations. She recently completed her undergrad education in economics and theater at Bucknell University. Jilly organized multiple direct action demonstrations for environmental, LGBTQ+ and racial justice. She has led initiatives for police accountability and public safety on her campus, has previously served as an intern at the Office of the Public Defender in Brunswick, Georgia, and at Public Citizen. Jilly's also on our amazing working group that helped put the summit together. I'm going to throw you the mic, Jilly, and we're so excited to hear from you and our young people.
Thank you so much, Josh, and hi, everyone. Thank you, everyone who's tuning into this awesome event today. I want to welcome us all to this youth panel discussion, and I can feel from the chat that this is a very supportive and welcoming group with open ears, excited to hear from young people. So I'm super excited and grateful to be a part of this conversation today. I'm going to jump right into it. So our panelists today work with the Center for Teen Empowerment, which has truly championed youth-led social change with their programming and advocacy, and we'll hear more about them a bit later. But I want to introduce our youth panelists today. So Maceo is a 19-year-old youth artist, artist manager, and youth organizer under Teen Empowerment Studios and Core Group. He just graduated from high school last year and has attended multiple elementary and middle schools through his 12 years of education. So he has a lot of experience and perspectives to speak about. Kai is 17 and he's a youth organizer from Dorchester who is concerned about how admin in schools go about conflict situations. Kai works at Teen Empowerment to advocate for issues inside the community. And then our final panelist is Desanea, who goes by Desi. She's 16 years old and goes to Madison Park Technical Vocational High School. She works for Teen Empowerment as a youth organizer trying to put an end to violence in the community. She's also a majorette dancer. So as you can see, we are graced today by a panel of brilliant young people who will be speaking on their experiences in Boston schools as either a current student or a recent graduate, and they are also all artists, advocates, community leaders, and experts. So we are all so appreciative to be able to share this e-space with these youth organizers and learn from your expertise. And before we jump into the conversation and start speaking about the school to prison pipeline, Maceo, could you speak a bit more about teen empowerment?
Sure. So Teen Empowerment is an organization that is dedicated to building youth and adult partnerships, creating positive changes within the community through events and initiatives, engagement through speeches, facilitating, and creative arts.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so this first question I'm going to direct toward Desi and Maceo. So we talk about the school to prison pipeline as ways that schools fail their students through school discipline, through school climate, which ultimately push young people closer to the justice system. Do you see this connection happening in your school or in the schools that you've attended? What does that look like? Desi, could you get us started, and then Maceo, could you follow up after?
Well, I got a Madison Park technical vocational high school, and like soon as we get outside of school, they have like paddy wagons and police outside of our school, like right after we get out of school. And they just like sit there like waiting for anything to happen and stuff. And like they sit outside their cars like watching us and stuff. And that feels like really weird. Like, why do they have police like around our schools like for kids?
Yeah, I've been to multiple different schools. I went to a K-8 school called the Martin Luther King School, and I noticed the kindergartners, they had these little plastic things they were holding on while they were walking in a line, and it reminded me of a chain gang. And I was like, you know, at the time, me and my friends was like making jokes about it, but as I got older and I realized there actually was a school to prison pipeline, I'm like, they started that early. Another thing that I feel resembles like prison within school is in uniforms. You know, I feel like uniforms really dehumanize students and like kills all creativity within them. You know.
And to add on, like even like with bullying incidents, like they'll either like suspend all the kids in bullying incidents, even the victims, or they'll suspend the victims at my school, like saying for their safety, they'll like suspend them and tell them not to come to school, but leave the kids inside the school that were bullying the kids. I just feel like that's mad weird. Like,
Yeah, 100%. Certainly doesn't make much sense. And I also remember that when we were preparing, we also were talking about metal detectors. Yeah, Maceo, could you speak a bit more on that?
Yeah. So the first time I saw a metal detector was when I went into high school. I went to English, and they had like metal detectors there, and it was crazy. I remember like some kid, his beeper kept going off every time he walked through it. So they actually pulled out the metal detecting wand. And I'm like, why is that necessary? Like the only time I've seen a metal detector in my life before then was at a courthouse. And it just seems it's almost as if they're like preparing that lifestyle for us in the future. You know, it comes off as that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that, you know, even within schools, these sort of prison-like systems and conditions are being replicated. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing those experiences and those insights with all of us and really giving us a better picture of what going to school in Boston looks like right now. So we often hear that, you know, these really intense and severe school discipline and policing measures are in order to keep order and safety within our schools. And obviously, I think we all want students and educators and everyone who is a part of the school community to feel safe and to feel accountable to themselves, to each other, to the community as a whole in a way that is positive and empowering for them. But it also seems like these school hardening and zero tolerance policies and metal detectors and police presence are having the exact opposite effect in terms of how it's making kids feel in their own learning environment. So Kai, I'd love to direct this next question toward you. If you were leading a school, how would you handle incidents so that students are accountable, but they also feel safe and welcomed in their school community and excited to learn?
For me, like I have to like for conflicts and all that, I'll like speak to like each of the students who are like involved in that conflict. And it's like, instead of like just like straight up handing them a what's it called, a suspension or detention, I'm gonna like figure out why they got into that conflict and figure out like if it's like a deeper issue than the thing it is. Because I feel like sometimes, like most of the time, when like conflicts happen, like such as like a bullying conflict, I feel like a lot of the time it doesn't, well, it's more than just like not liking someone. Like sometimes they're like battling something internally. So it's like, you know what I mean? Like it's not fair for me to just go on and get a punishment and they still go home battling all with the battling. Cause in that case, I probably didn't make a difference or made it worse. So it's like it's like I want to make sure like they understand why it's wrong and not like make them like hold on, like I don't want to like tell them that. You know what I mean? Like I want to like teach them in a way where they learn it's wrong and not just me telling them it's wrong. Cause it's like that way they like take accountability off themselves all now and in the future. And for my school, like I wouldn't have like metal detectors or none of that because like I want people to want to come to school and learn and feel safe. Like metal detectors for me personally, it made me not want to go to school and all that. Cause it's like, you know what I mean? Like I'm going there, I feel like a prisoner. There's school police watching me. I'm being watched by cameras as well. I'm getting patted checked down. It's like that's not a school that I want to be a part of. Like, you know what I mean? And it's like also it's like I would not have school police because I feel like school police can make certain students feel uncomfortable and not want to be there. Cause like not everybody had, cause like you know what I mean? Like not everybody feels comfortable around police. So it's like, you know what I mean? So it's like I won't have that either. So yeah, I think that's what I'll do for like solutions. And
Yeah.
for like the victim who being like assaulted, bullied, or like anything in that case, I'll speak to them and like I will see if they're comfortable on having like a one-on-one conversation and figure out like if they don't apologize or something like that, and if they can like move on in the future. And if not, I'll like ask that student what they're comfortable with doing instead of just like giving them a solution which they don't want. So it's like I will let them like pick, I'll let them like choose for themselves, either like transfer classes or transfer schools, or like find anything else that could help them. And I will definitely eliminate the the grade ranking system. Like for my school, you could come in at like certain age, let's say like 15 or 16. Cause I feel like having like a grade system doesn't really work. And I say this because so like I feel like grade systems can make somebody feel like they aren't as smart as somebody else or their peers. And also like let's say somebody is falling behind or not like comprehending or learning as fast as their peers, then basically they'll be held back. And being held back don't feel good. And I think from personal experience, like I was held back because I wasn't learning as quick as my peers. That made me feel like a little less, you know what I mean, than listening to everybody else. So in my school, you'll graduate once you're ready. Like, you know what I mean? Like we will evaluate your grades off like the old school, everything else, and we'll like make you take a test, and then and like off that we will evaluate how you're doing, and with that we'll give you like the time when we think you're ready to graduate based off what you've done instead of school, instead of grades. But also I feel like grades do not determine how smart someone is at all. Like you can't get somebody a letter grade and tell them this how smart you are.
Yeah.
I like to add on. I can speak from experience as well about how it feels to be held back. I was held back in 6th grade, and just seeing it feels like you're just left behind not only within school but within life. Because when you're at that age and you're going through the schooling system, school is your life at that point. Outside of family, of course. But it's just, I remember seeing all my friends from 6th grade graduate before me and leave middle school and then graduate high school before me. And it just made me feel left behind, I feel like the grading system is more to show how good the school is, more so than how the students are,
Yeah. Thank you so much, Maceo and Takai, for sharing how those experiences had made you feel, devalued because of the grading system, because of how conflict is handled, because of the hardening policies that are all contributing to this school climate that is focusing more on ordering kids both hierarchically, but also ordering their own personal expression and interactions with each other. And Takai, thank you so much for that really inspiring vision of what your school would look like and how it would be a more safe and welcoming place on a variety of levels. I know that we're short on time, so I'll start to wrap this up since we certainly covered a lot today, even though I know that we're just scratching the surface of school climate issues. We heard about police presence, disproportionate discipline, and concluded with that really hopeful vision that reminds us that things can look so much different than they are right now and much more rooted in care and support. And the young people are really the folks who are going to be leading this. So thank you again to all of our panelists, Maceo, Desi, and Takai, for sharing your insights. And I really hope that we all make sure to bring our learnings from this youth panel discussion out into the work that we do every day as we come together as a community to lift up young people. So thank you so much, and back to you, Josh.
Maceo, Desi, Takai, Jilly, thank you so much. We need to definitely have y'all back and at the planning table for next year for this summit. Thank you so much for all that you've brought to this space and the wisdom that you hold for the future of our schools and our learning environments. I'm gonna do a switch up to my speakers and panelists really quick because I want to really lean into what we're talking about cultivating restorative environments, really leaning into like the needs of the individual young folks in our community. So I'm going to ask if we can move up our restorative environments panel, moderated by Diana, to right now, and then we're going to push our community coalitions, building a center of gravity in this work as we move toward the end of our time together. And I appreciate and extend an ask for grace that I'm going to be doing a bit of a switch up here. But I'm going to introduce Diana, who's then going to introduce folks who are working in building restorative environments across the state. Diana Georges is the Community Engagement Coordinator at Mass Appleseed Center for Law and Justice, is an experienced organizer responsible for strengthening existing community partnerships, creating new partnerships, and ensuring youth and community voices are centered through the center's advocacy work. She's a graduate of Bates College, where her education focused on social inequality and environmental justice. She brings a background in using restorative justice as a framework to repair harm and build environments that prioritize the dignity and healing of young people. Her work is rooted in the belief that organizing should be a joyful act where we all come together to create kinder, more equitable, and a more sustainable world. Diana, thank you for being here and for your flexibility and for helping to lead this conversation today.
Of course. Thank you so much, Josh. That's a lovely intro. I just wanted to start by just giving a brief background on restorative justice, just because I don't think everybody's had the chance to just know what that is. And I love that we get to kind of end the summit with this, because when I learned about all the kind of systemic discrimination that happens in our education system, I learned that right on hand with restorative justice is one of like the main tools of combating that. And I think everything that everyone has said earlier will point to this. So basically, restorative justice is a framework that's rooted in relationship building. It views all conflict as harm done to relationships and seeks to repair that harm in order to break the cycles of violence. RJ originates from Indigenous and non-Western values and conflict resolution systems that center on community and reconciliation. The power of RJ, in my opinion, is that it moves us from defining justice as punishment to understanding justice as healing, mutual concern, and dignity. And just briefly, the history is that it was implemented into the Western criminal justice system around the 70s to reduce recidivism, repair harm, and keep marginalized people out of prisons. And that's been semi-successful. And then it entered the US school consciousness in about 2014 as a way to address the school to prison pipeline. And it has been effective at doing so, and I think our panelists will show that. There's no one perfect solution to address inequity and discrimination in schools. Instead, the theory of restorative justice can be applied to all areas of the school, because like at the end of the day, everything comes back to how we show care, either interpersonally or institutionally. And while there are lots of aspects of RJ to be considered, the main practice essentially follows 3 steps. The first being storytelling and relationship building, the second being truth telling and accountability, and the third being reparative action. And just to touch on 2 quick examples of what RJ in schools looks like. The first is alternative forms of discipline, right? So instead of saying, let's exclude and isolate students because of their behavior, we ask instead, how can harm be repaired? And that can either look, just very brief examples, it can either be like a mediation between students, or it can look like a student cleaning up a mess that they made, right? So having the student be able to pay back the harm that they've done and to continue to build a stronger relationship instead of isolating, kicking out, everything that I think especially the young student panel that just went explained so beautifully. And then another example is a participatory education model, where students have a greater choice in what they learn, how they learn, and are more invested in their education and are active participants in it, instead of just being expected to be all robots doing the same thing. Some barriers to RJ in schools, which our panelists will, I think, also cover, is that unfortunately it gets worse before it gets better. It's a whole new way of relating that is being learned, and that comes with a very steep learning curve. You also need to have buy-in from school leadership and faculty. It's not something that one person can do, but it's something that has to be done as a collective school. And then a lot of people see RJ only as a reactive tool, so a way to deal with harm once it's happened, and they don't take the time to build those relationships beforehand and be proactive, and that just ends up replicating harmful dynamics within RJ tools themselves. And finally, teachers being understaffed, underpaid, and under-resourced, right? Like if they're just trying to put out fires and survive day to day in the school environment, there's no way to be asking teachers to be fundamentally changing the way that they are interacting and managing their classrooms. Okay, so that was my brief intro, and I'd like to introduce our panel members, who will also provide a quick overview of themselves and their work before we begin our discussion. So first we have Aaron Buford. He is the Restorative Justice Coordinator at Amherst High School. He's been an educator in the classroom for 14 years. He's passionate about working towards changes that shift school cultures away from deeply rooted exclusionary practices, honoring the voices and perspectives that have been silenced, and aligning school practices and policies with our collective values. Aaron, do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Thank you for that introduction and that overview. I just say that I'm excited to be here and looking forward to how this might plug me into a network of folks who are just moving the work forward in ways that feel like they affirm the values that we know support healthy communities and building stronger relationships, where in this situation, in this context, where students feel like there's a sense of belonging and a community that supports their personal and academic growth. So thank you for having me.
Our next speaker is Domi Laura. Domi is an Afro-Latino Dominican young adult who has invested his life to fight for social justice in a variety of ways. He's been a part of the Palante family for 7 years now in different roles, first as a youth peer leader, then as an alumni fellow, and currently as a youth leadership coordinator. He aims to keep the fight going and to support the newer generations and pass the torch forward.
Thank you so much for that intro. Super excited to be here. I see some familiar faces, David. My mentor and teacher, Evelyn, is in the room. So I'm just super excited to keep making connections and keep pushing the fight forward. So super happy to be here.
And our last panelist is a relatively recent transplant to the area. Kit Sabo has spent the last 6 years in Western Mass working with community conflict resolution, environmental justice activism, mediation and facilitation, and examining how conflict can serve as a gateway for meaningful change. With a background in teaching and education, Kit sees strong intergenerational relationships and the leadership of young people as sources of hope and as central to his personal and professional paths. As a program director, a collaborative resolutions group, Kit oversees the restorative practices, work in partnership with area schools and local youth advocacy organizations. Welcome, Kit.
Thanks, Dana. Thanks for that intro. And hello, Aaron, and hello, Domi. It's good to, I know in this age of Zoom, I'm glad to say that I've met you both in person, and so glad to be on this panel with y'all.
Awesome. I'm excited to talk to y'all. We're going to jump right into the first question, the $1 million question. What do you see as the greatest barriers to RJ implementation in schools? And a follow-up is, how can school administrators support RJ practitioners and them implementing their work? So Aaron, we can start with you if you feel ready.
Sure. Yeah. I know when I read that question, I think that, just the culture of punishment and consequences to actions just feels so entrenched in our system and our thinking. I think our own socialization and, that we bring into our work and students coming into the buildings, we bring our histories and the things that we inherit through our experiences into relationship with policies and interactions in the school, and it can feel like a real challenge to really speak a different language and really connect on a different level, where we're thinking beyond punishments and we're thinking of beyond accusations and we're thinking beyond our cultural differences, and we can shift towards thinking about the being in a place where we can really ask that question of, like, what values do I stand on when I'm my best self? And that people are interested and invested in supporting me and standing in my values. And so for me, one of the biggest challenges is just kind of trying to, uproot the deeply rooted policies and systems in our schools that have just informed the way that we show up as adults in the building, or the way that most folks show up in our buildings. We're not like an RJ school, right? Like, that's not a mandate right now. And so it's just a lot of work to really talk through all of our like socialization and our opinions, and pretty firm opinions about the impact of our actions and what should happen as a result. So that feels like a hard thing for me right now, is just working with adults and showing up for young people and really walking with them in that personal accountability process in a way that's like about them and their humanity. That's particularly challenging right now.
A follow-up to that is, I feel like part of it is that teachers aren't accustomed to think about sharing power with students. And that's like part of the conversation, right? They're like, I'm in charge of this classroom, which is part of their conditioning, right? So like, have you found that adults that you work with tend to be receptive to you asking them to do this kind of change in mindset?
I feel it. Dami, I saw you shaking your head. So that resonated with you heavy too. So I want to hear that, your perspective on that. I know for us, what I feel like teachers are starting to open up their classroom spaces for are the like relationship building opportunities. It's been a struggle up into today. It's been a struggle to really make the connection of how the relationships are such a like driving force for understanding the motivations that really support students in how they are in the classroom engaged in content. Like, once we get to the content conversation, I feel like teachers kind of take a step back and it's like, this is my area of expertise. So I definitely feel like we have a lot of growing to do to break into that area. They support us in the building relationships and community within the context of the classroom, but it feels like they haven't quite seen that connection of how it directly impacts learning and curriculum.
Thank you. Domi, I want to toss it to you as well. And do you just want to tell people about Palante? Because if they don't know, it's an amazing organization. So I feel like everyone should know about that.
Okay. What's up, y'all? How y'all feeling? How y'all living? It's almost 6 o'clock where I'm at. Hope y'all getting ready, feeling good, excited. Thank you. Palante is a youth-led transformative justice program here based in Holyoke, rooted in Holyoke, centered around 2 core principles, and that is indigenous circle practice in youth participatory action research, long for YPAR. And yeah, we just do everything we can, especially started in the schools in Holyoke, and now that we're outside the schools, rooted in combating and keeping that pulse in the school to prison pipeline, right? Creating different ways for our youth to get what they need and not really fall into that system that is really made for all of us. Because I'm a youth, I consider myself a youth, but for all of us to fail, right? Like, and that's crazy. But yeah, what's the question though? I got excited talking about the program that I went a little left.
That's all good. What do you think the greatest barriers for RJ implementation are right now in your
Yeah,
work?
getting adults to work with youth, right? That's critical. Like that's important. And a lot of the times, right, adult educators, I should say, educators fail to acknowledge that they're there for the youth, right? Like they wouldn't have a job if the youth weren't coming to school. You know what I mean? So like a part of the solution when we talking about incorporating RJ or TJ, because I feel like they go hand in hand in a way, is truly to have the youth be part of the solution, because that's critical. We can't do something that's for them if they're not in the room. Like that's crazy. Implementing youth voices being heard, and that is a challenge definitely because of power structures and power dynamics, and a lot of adults don't want to give up that because this is my classroom and I whatever I say goes, and shifting those mindsets, right? It could be a definitely difficult, right? And then in terms, for example, in a district like Holyoke, where it's under receivership, right? There's also a lot of hoops that you have to jump through, right? Like you have to go through the principal, but what if the principal is not? You go to the district, superintendent, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, I mean, those are two huge barriers that get in the way for sure.
Thank you. I forgot about the receivership part, but that's like a whole separate, literally, yeah. Kit, what do you say? What are you thinking?
No, I mean, this is a great question, and so we're Collaborative Resolutions Group has been asking this question since 2018. A lot of the work that we're doing right now is in collaboration with schools in Franklin, Hampshire, and Hampden counties. And in 2018, we did some mapping, and we were trying to get a sense of who is doing restorative work in these schools. What are the questions that they have? What are the challenges? The struggles, and we've been getting a sense of that in this region, but I imagine that this is going to be true in a lot of different schools across the state. But the challenges, I mean, so when schools reach out to us and are looking for consulting, right, and they're wanting to know, how do we do this at their school? They're often coming from this place of, you know, there was a harm that happened in the school, and we don't want to be using exclusionary disciplinary practices. We don't want to be looking at these traditional forms of discipline. And there's this move towards restorative, but there's not an understanding of what that means. And so they're reaching out to an organization like ours, and they're saying, you know, we want to have a restorative approach. So how do we do it? Like, how do we check that box? How do we try to approach this differently? And the intention is so good, it's so right on. But I think that those conversations don't go much further in my experience, because when we start to talk about what it means, right? Because like you were talking a little bit about this, Dan, in your definition, which was so spot on, but like restorative justice asks us to rethink the way that we've been taught to understand how harm is handled, right? Like it asks us to reassess our belief that punishment equals justice. It looks at, you know, systemic injustice, and like the work that Palante is doing with transformative justice is all about, we're talking about changing transformation, right? It's a lot of work. And so one of the biggest barriers, I think, is looking at some of that systemic change, that whole school change that Aaron was talking about. Like, how do we begin to really reshape? And we're talking about this as a paradigm shift. And I think individuals are often ready and like have been doing the work. We see a lot of folks who are ready and who are connecting with each other, and there's a growing network, especially here in Western Mass, but I think across the state. But when we're talking about it at an institutional level, there's a lot of work we still have to do.
Thank you, Kit. Unfortunately, we're going to be wrapping it up a little bit. So I want us to end on a positive note. What is something, I'll take two questions. You guys can pick which one you want to answer. One question is like, why are you still hopeful about this work, right? Like when you look around at the world and you see the garbage can fire that our world is, like, why are you still hopeful about what we can do through restorative justice? And then the other question is, how can the people around you support your work? How can we so we're like structurally support your work, right? Like as institutions and organizations and advocates and just the wide array of people that are around. Aaron, you go first again.
Sure. I just love the energy and the intent. Like one thing I often say to folks is as we're we're doing some pre-circles and trying to get folks and see if folks are ready to participate and talk about what's going on and make amends. Once folks experience the process, it just feels right and it feels natural. Like it feels like what we're supposed to be doing when we're in community with each other. And like that's the part that continues to energize me, that there are just so many examples of like reconnection and finding more understanding than we might have had before, because we've finally been given an opportunity to actually talk to each other. And so that's always the part that keeps me going into the building every day, is that like the connection with the students is really big, and that's the part that always feels really just validating and like just gives me energy. But the other part is just seeing it work and people show up and they're just so the opposite of what others might think they are. They just demonstrate such a capacity for like compassion and being accountable for standing in their own values and myself included. Like that a part of this work has definitely allowed me to get right with myself and about how I show up every day and stand and to have these restorative interactions. And so I think that's the most important part for me, is that it works in such a beautiful way, and we see those in sometimes small, sometimes in big ways, in our school, in ways that just make it just so obvious to me that there's such great need for this work to continue to be done and for this culture shift, this paradigm shift to happen, because we are a school community and it matters and has such a greater impact on us than a detention or a suspension or a conference with some administrator. Restorative circles have way far reaching impact than the traditional approaches. So that gives me a lot of hope. I'll let other folks speak to that and also speak to the piece about what can be done to support. I think I might have said enough.
No, thank you. You're right. And when it works, it's like magic. It's like, you're like, this is how we should be interacting with each other. It's like a brilliant feeling. Delmi, what are you thinking?
What keeps me going forward, right? It's funny, right? I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic, and when I heard you say the origin, right, or of RJ that started in the West and then got introduced to the school system in 2014. I think all I could think about is but I knew this way before that. You know what I mean? And I go back home. I start thinking about home and how we carry and how we conduct ourselves back at home. And the stories that my grandfather and the values that my grandfather taught me and passed on to me are like, this is what I see in RJ. You know what I mean? So like, this feels home. When you have a deja vu, that you'll be like, I've been here before. I've seen this before. That's exactly how the same feeling runs down my spine. Like, this is home. I know what I'm doing. You know what I mean? So as long as I keep having that feeling, and I will have it for the rest of my life, I'm going to keep going with this fight. So yeah, that's what keeps
I love that.
me going.
Thank you. Kit.
I see Joshua's joined us, and I know we're tight for time, so I'm willing to give up my time, or just close by saying, I mean, young people, they give me hope every time, all the time. So I'm yeah, and people like Domi and Aaron doing this work. So thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. That was uplifting. That was awesome.
Yeah, thank you all so much for those really important perspectives, and also the hope that carries us through and as folks are involved in this work. So thank you so much. I appreciate everyone who is still here. We got a little bit more time. We got a few more folks to speak to. I am just so overwhelmed with the wisdom, the talent, the skill, the passion that's been in this summit today. And I'm excited to talk about what does this look like in community. And I'm going to be moderating a panel partially because I'm able to be the timekeeper now, but talking about building a center of gravity within our communities, and the impact of coalitions and partnerships. And my background is as a facilitator, asking how do we cultivate and hold space that allows us to move forward in healing, centered, restorative, and joyful ways as we work through challenge. And in that work, I've had the incredible privilege to work with all three of these folks that we're going to be hearing from briefly today. Jen Carey is the founding executive director of the Worcester Education Collaborative, which I have the privilege of sitting on the board for, which is an organization that has built the Worcester Education Equity Roundtable. And I want to, these next three guests, I'm going to invite to speak, as opposed to jumping into a full kind of dialogue conversation because of time. I want to invite them to speak a little bit about themselves, their organizations, the impact of coalitions and coming together. Something that I recognize that is very challenging in this work sometimes is that all of us can be so focused in the work of our individual organization or the individual work that we're doing. It's challenging to sometimes take time to come out and come together and sit at these intersections with folks that are doing similar, overlapping, and different work, because this work is also intersectional and connected. So I want to lead with the questions of like, how do we cultivate shared space in our coalitions, and what sustains that work? Who funds that work? And how are priorities determined so that the community voice can be amplified en masse when organizations come together to advocate on each other's behalf? So Jen, thank you so much for being here, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh. This has been an excellent, excellent day. I have pages and pages of notes. But to answer your question, I think in order to address any social issue, particularly issues of this magnitude, it's important to have a collective impact strategy, which is what my organization, Worcester Education Collaborative, has always used. And by that, I mean having people come together to, one, define the problem, two, gather data about what the problem is, decide on who is going to be the person to run point on that. And it might be a different organization every time. There are times when organizations will take the lead, other times when they will follow, other times when they will contribute, other times when they will step out of an issue and not be involved for a variety of reasons. But that's the approach my organization has taken. So when we began to get into the issue of the school to prison pipeline, we got into this because we were hearing a lot of distress from families, from teachers, from students about the number of kids who were subject to exclusionary discipline. We were also, interestingly, involved in a project, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. And one of the things that you look at with grade level reading is attendance. And looking at the attendance begged the question of why kids were not in school in general, which opened up the whole issue to us of out of school discipline and excluding kids from being in school, excluding kids from learning, excluding kids from the socialization that goes on in schools. So we gathered a group of people together, worked with our colleagues at the Latino Education Institute here in Worcester and the Gaston Institute out of UMass Boston, and wrote a paper called Not Present, Not Accounted For, which spoke about school discipline in Worcester. That raised this, along with a series of op-eds that we wrote, raised this not just as a school issue, but as a community issue, and raised the question of what we needed to do as a full community to address these issues. That's how we worked advanced the entire issue around out of school discipline and the school to prison pipeline. It also taught us a number of lessons which we have applied to our other work. And one of the approaches that has been extraordinarily helpful to us as an organization, to other organizations in our community overall, is the Worcester Education Equity Roundtable. That is a gathering of people with a dog in the hunt in education, with a vested interest in education, youth development organizations, our higher education institutions, the school district, parents, and so forth, who come together monthly for shared learning, to issue spot, to do joint problem solving around critical issues related to education. So.
Thank you so much, Jen. I'd now like to welcome Amy O'Leary, who's the Executive Director of Strategies for Children, an advocacy organization that works to ensure Massachusetts invests in high-quality early education and care programs for children from birth to age 5. Oh, actually, I think we might have lost Amy briefly, so I might jump over to Mary. Mary Viano is the Associate Director of the Parent Professional Advocacy League, a family-run grassroots nonprofit organization based in Boston, and the state organization of the National Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health. We are going to close out our time with a video from PAL, and I want to emphasize and highlight the importance of the youth and family voice in all of this work, and something that Mary is a very loud advocate for, and it's so appreciated, Mary, making sure that we're always putting that focus back on, like, you know, and I think for folks who do this work and have the privilege of sitting in some of these roles, it can be easy to get into the data and the acronyms and the jargon and the words and the you know, well, but folks should understand ... right? And that never works if the youth and family voice isn't regularly centered in engagement, in learning, in brainstorming, in addressing solutions. So thank you for being here, and I'll ask you this same questions as I asked Jen. Talk a little bit about the impact of coalition building and organizing, and how to cultivate this space for moving towards shared vision and really the sustaining this work.
Thank you, Joshua, and really appreciate everybody here today. As Joshua had said, PAL is a family organization, and by definition, that means that 51% of our board at all times need to be family members. Our staff are given preference with lived experience, and it would be unjust for me not to say that we've had hard conversations with state folks and providers, and really want to be able to partner with, and Jennifer, you really talked about it, learn from the people on the grounds, what's working, what's not working. That really is the coalition building and the connection that we do directly with our family organization. We connect all the way from Southeast, the islands, to the Western Mass borders of New York, up to New Hampshire and down, you know, for the full Commonwealth. We are free. We don't have a wait list. You can connect to us. But one of the biggest pieces that we see is that families are saying that the trauma that they receive when they get into court, even just walking in themselves, can be challenging. I feel that my role here today is not just to talk about what works, what doesn't work, but the fact to really bring that I'm a white privileged white woman. And that is something that my kids that identify as white are treated very differently than my children that are Black and brown in my community. So we have to talk about equality. It is not just based also for the coalition building for people that are brown and Black to do the work. It's for the white people to do the work side by side, and sometimes a little bit more assertively to just say this is what's right and this is what's wrong. So we really sit together with departments and the juvenile detention alternatives to really push this. We hear from families though when we ask them the hard questions. What works, what's helpful and what's harmful, and you'll hear that in the video. I'm gonna just kind of close out to give us some extra time, but know that we're in your corner statewide. We travel, we go where you are, but really we bring the families in your community that can tell you what's working and not working so that we can make changes across the state. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you so much, Mary. And thank you all for being here. I want to give another shout out to our working group, our JDAI working group to eliminate the school to prison pipeline in Mass. You've witnessed a fraction of some of the work and conversations that have been had to bring this summit together. And I think, again, as we talk about the impact of coalitions and groups that are working at intersections, this was a powerful showcase of all of the not all of, but a lot of the ways that these the work around literacy and law and policy and our court systems and our classrooms are interwoven, and there's nuance and intersectionality within all of that. And these spaces are so powerful to hold, and it's been a privilege to hold this with all of you today. I want to thank the DYS Acting Commissioner, Cecily Reardon, for supporting the work of JDAI and championing DYS's commitment to striving for race equity for all youth in DYS's care and custody. Also to the Annie Casey Foundation, who helped support funding this effort and the summit. Thank you to Katie and the JDAI team and every organization that sits on that working group. If folks want to be involved in the working group and in this work moving forward, we are going to share a survey, which we're gonna share in the chat, and folks, I'd encourage you to fill that out as we're going to watch the video that Pal put together to round out our time here. And thank you all so much for joining us and participating. This will be the recording will be shared out to folks who registered for the summit, as well as across social and things like that. So if folks are interested in getting involved, please keep an eye out for our follow-up email, and please stick around for this really impactful video from Pal, who, as they talk to youth and families about their perspectives and experiences related to the topics that we've been talking about today. Going into screen share mode again. There we go.
Hi, my name is Mary Viano. I'm really excited to be with you today as the Associate Director and family member that has walked the walk with other families today. I'm representing the organization PAL, which stands for the Parent Professional Advocacy League, and we're very excited and grateful to the family members that are with us today. This fireside chat is like you're sitting in a living room with friends, family members, people in your community that have really gotten you through the walk and the journey. So we are going to start with some questions, and really excited for all of you to hear from their perspective what worked, didn't work, what was harmful or helpful, and also the solutions of what they believe the system, the state, and the culture needs to do to shift to do better for families. So Elizabeth, I'm going to start with you. As a grandmother that has supported a grandchild that entered the juvenile justice system, can you tell me what brought you here and what was your first introduction into juvenile justice?
My grandson's middle school principal decided that because he was being homeschooled, that it wasn't enough for him. And so they wanted me to send him to school, and I refused to. At that particular time, COVID was high. And they called me and told me that they were gonna put a CRA on him and also call Department of Youth Services on me. And so that was my first introduction. And we went to court for the CRA. I didn't know much about it. I was a little scared. And I had a lawyer. I don't know if she had age, if she was retired or anything like that, but she didn't really explain much to me. So I felt I wanted to get the help that he needed. So I signed the papers. I don't even think I filled them in. I just literally signed them.
That really helped.
That leads, to the help that he needed.
That really helps, Elizabeth. And I know that you've been open to say that your grandchild does have some mental health and learning disabilities. So that must have felt even more complex of getting the papers pushed to sign.
Yes. I really was doing it not for him to receive help.
Thank you. So we're now going to go over to Antonio. And Antonio, I'm going to come over and ask you that same question. What brought you to the juvenile justice journey for yourself and your family?
So when I was in elementary school, I ended up having a close encounter with a police officer where I attempted to assault the police officer and was put in a jail cell for 4 hours. That led to a devastating cycle.
I really appreciate, mentioning that really hard, traumatic experience. I think that's, as a young person, imagine what that felt like. So really appreciate you stepping up and sharing that with us. Joanna, we're going to come over to you. In what was the first enter to the juvenile justice system from your standpoint and your family?
Yeah, I was introduced to a CRA because my son was having a lot of challenges, not just at home, but also the community and school. These challenges were due to his own mental health disability. I did have a lot of providers coming to my home. The providers came up with an idea that was like, to me, it was like the answer to all my prayers, because I was terrified with the way that things were going. And the answer to my prayers was to open a CRA.
It's really devastating, I think, as we've heard across, and where people want help for their children and often get pushed to court and not knowing what it is. So really appreciate all of you explaining kind of what your first step in journey was. We're going to come over to you, Joanna, to tell us what do you believe was helpful and what was harmful to your family? And then after you, we'll go to Antonio.
Well, my son was having a lot of struggles because of his disability, and I didn't think that this was going to provide the mental health services that he needed. Like, there was not going to be any support for my son or for myself in order to support him. And we shouldn't send children to court. I don't feel that that is the answer to the solution to that, a provider.
And would you say that there was anything that was helpful to you, or would you say that there wasn't?
I don't think there was anything like that was helpful to me. When I started learning about like a CRA, it just seemed like it would do more harm. Because when I went to look at the court system, when the cases were being heard, people that were there, the parents look just like me and the children look just like my child. So, and the providers look more like, and providers, lawyers, and even the judge look white. I didn't think that they were going to be able to help me, and that because they knew my culture,
Right. I really appreciate you elevating the culture and there's disparities, right, that come from what and you understand and not understand. It's complicated in its own place with the language differences. Antonio, can you tell us from your perspective what was helpful or harmful that you would like our community to know so that they can do better?
So at least what was helpful was an understanding. Well, what was helpful was having a mother who was a super advocate with being able to help me understand what was going on, at least as much as she could. And that's about all I could say that was helpful. Harmful, I think the system is very destructive, especially when, like, for example, for me, when I was considered to be on the spectrum, And I didn't understand my own emotions at a very young age. And so it was very misunderstood, and the system didn't understand that. They weren't trained in that. Police aren't intensely trained in considering that a person might have disabilities. So they treat you like everyone else, like you're supposed to know, or you have an idea, or there's people who really may not. And I feel that lawyers, police officers, judges need to kind of switch up their agenda and need to start being more intense with learning how to deal with people with disabilities and take that in consideration, and not just sending them to court or not just sending them to a DCF facility or a DYS facility.
Right. I really appreciate that. And I think also elevating the, different individuals with different diagnoses and or trauma or being on the spectrum. So really highlighting that is appreciated. Elizabeth, we're going to come over to you now on what you feel for your family was either helpful or harmful, so that we can do better as a community and a Commonwealth.
What was helpful was the fact that I was able to get to trying to get my grandson diagnosed, trying to get him to the psychiatrist, a forensic psychiatrist, and try to figure out what was going on with him. I didn't have the money to get at all the resources and meet all the people that I met. What was harmful when I entered the court system was that he had picked up a few criminal charges. And even though the court understood that he had a mental health disabilities, they would love to punish him. It's all about punishment.
I appreciate that. And I know that's very hard to say, Elizabeth, is that it seems like, as the court doors opened, there was a new situation that came in, a new situation. And you've talked with Pal openly and honestly about it became, kind of a rolling ball of situations.
Yeah.
It never looked at him for what he was going through or the function of his behavior, but rather this kind of cycle that just got worse. So appreciate you mentioning that as well. Antonio, we're going to come over to you for our last question, and we're going to close up. What is one thing that you believe could be a possible solution to make things better? I know you talked a little bit about the needs to understanding mental health diagnoses, individuals on the spectrum, and a little bit on training. Do you want to tell us more about a solution that you feel that would help? And then we will go to Elizabeth and then Joanna.
Not allowing children to come to court, be in court, I feel like it's destructive to their mental health and keeps them in a cycle. And I feel like there maybe should be in an intensive care unit or of some kind, that if a kid is getting a little out of hand, it's not just, oh, let's call DCF and wait until they get to us, or it's not just, let's bring them to court and send them to DYS. I feel like there should be a care unit that is readily available at any time
to deal with a crisis.
And the child could stay there for a few days until they're calmed down, like a green.
Appreciate it.
Quiet room.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Antonio. Thank you. Elizabeth, we'll come over to you. What is one solution that you would love to see that is a possibility to make things better?
I would love to see just like they have programs for the children, but they don't have enough beds for the children. This particular state that we live in doesn't have the beds available for children. When my grandson did have a breakdown, I did call a program, Human Services or something like that. And they came out and they did put him in the hospital, but he stayed in the back room for 9 days.
So one of the things
no bed.
One of the things that I know about you, Elizabeth, as a grandmother that's doing this grand work, right, of raising a grandchild and children, is that you're invested. You drive hours to see your kid, and sometimes it can be really complicated. So really thinking about what families need is a highlight that I'm also hearing. So we've got about 2 minutes to wrap up. Joanna, I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us one solution that you think, or a few solutions, and then I will close us out to our fireside chat. Joanna?
Definitely providers and staff that look like me, and to educate providers to exhaust all the resources in the community, especially getting parents connected to other parents that have lived experience. And please, we shouldn't be sending our children to court.
So I really appreciate, on behalf of PAL, but personally from both Candace and I, who work so hard to have families have different opportunities before getting to court. Each of you try every day to do the best of your ability in supporting your loved ones and or yourself. On behalf of PAL and on behalf of the conference that we're with today, we really appreciate your voice, your experience, and most of all, your willingness to be part of the solutions that are coming. PAL is a family organization that supports families. We meet parents where they're at. We connect directly to them on a peer-to-peer model. And we also connect to youth directly to youth in our program called Youth with Massachusetts. We are here for the win, and the win would be that all families, all children, all young people have the opportunities that they deserve. No matter what their race, their culture, equality exists. So we know that we can do it. PAL is in your corner to make it better. On behalf of our organization and these amazing families and young people today, we thank you and look for us really advocating to make it better. Thank you. Hi, my name is Mary Viano. I'm really
Thank you so much, Mary and Pal, for putting that together. And thank you all so much for attending. I know we are 16 minutes past time. Thank you for everyone who stuck around. And I'm really just going to put the charge out there for folks to consider what School to Possibility pipeline might look like in your communities. We'll be doing follow-up and outreach and hope folks will continue to engage in this work. Thank you again to JDAI and Annie Casey for making this possible, and the incredible talent, wisdom, and information shared in our working group to disrupt and eliminate the school to prison pipeline in Massachusetts. Have a great night, everybody.